OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
You're very welcome along this Thursday morning to OTB AM. It's Ger and Eoin and Eoin Sheehan with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. We'd love to hear from you. 087 9180 180 is the WhatsApp number. You can leave a comment on the YouTube stream where you're probably watching this, or indeed maybe if you're watching us on Periscope, use the hashtag OTBAM to get your opinions across to us. Or you can listen to us on our app. Just download the OTB Sports app, search OTB Sports in Google Play or in the App Store, and you can download it for nothing, and then you can listen to our radio station, and it's called OTB Sports Radio, by the way. You didn't know that by now. And then you can tweet us, or you can do whatever you want, because you'll be free. Your hands are free to do whatever it is that you want to do. Coming up on the show this morning, Harry Arter versus Roy Keane. The debate has reignited after Harry Arter spoke to the lads last night. We're going to hear from the Chief Executive of the Gaelic Players Association, Paul Flynn, bring it through the sports pages, top stories of the day, set the agenda for you, get some tips from the Galway Races from John Duggan, and we'll look back at how he did yesterday. The NBA bubble wrap seems to have worked so far. 0 positive tests as the NBA season restarts. We'll speak with Farmer Jones at around about 9:20 this morning, and Deal or No Deal with Phil Egan coming your way. Everybody wants their transfer tittle-tattle, and it's a bumper day today. The transfer stories have begun in earnest. First up this morning, though, we're going to hear from one of the founding members of the Gaelic Players Association, Donal O'Neill, in conversation with Joe Malloy last night. Have a listen.
Happy to welcome to the show Donal O'Neill, a founding member of the GPA. He was commercial director when he stepped away in 2007, and he's with us now from Cape Town, I think. Donal, how are you doing?
Yes, indeed, Joe. Good evening.
Yeah, great to have you with us. So the annual GPA report was published today. I don't think there's anything earth-shattering in it, but it might be just an opportunity to get your sense of where the GPA is, where it's going, where it's trying to go in, and how good a job it's doing. I asked people at the top of the show for a general sense of their perceptions of the GPA. What do you suspect came in from the public at large?
Well, you'll have a mixed bag, of course, and that's, I think, necessary. It's also unexpected. When we set out on the GPA track, it's over 20 years ago now, and of course it was very controversial, and it was all very aggressive and tit for tat and whatnot. But since the financial deal was cut that established the GPA as a permanent entity, let's say, the organisation is obviously quieter. There's a whiff of the civil service about it because there's a set budget and there's a group of people who are doing their best to spend that wisely. And of course, you've got some outspoken critics. Colm O'Rourke, I love Colm, but I disagree with him on this, being one, Joe Brawley being another, that there's too much money involved, etc., etc., etc. But the bottom line here is that any players' organisation worth its salt anywhere in the world is on a percentage of commercial income. And we knew that, and that was always our ambition in the early days of the GPA. And listen, the only currency that the GA truly understands is money, and we knew that, and that turned out to be the case, that when we went about our business to disrupt things like the All-Stars, to create our own awards, to agitate for further commercial opportunities, that upset the GA, and it upset them to the point where they came to the table and they ultimately negotiated a deal. And some people don't like that, but that is the reality of the GA, and it's certainly the reality that I experienced in my time with the GPA. And I don't think that's changed. So if people say the GPA is getting too much money, the reality is not that the GA is giving them too much money, it's that the GA is generating too much money. And because the GA is run very much as a professional sport from a management and administrative level. So people need to understand very firmly what the GA is doing. And if the GA wants to, or people want to see the GPA and the players put less money towards, some of the great initiatives that the GPA do on behalf of players, then one way to do that is to reduce the GA's own income, which is very easy to do. You just cut away a lot of the commercial programming, you reduce ticket sales, you make it a true socialist organisation, and the problem goes away. But the problem for me has never been with the GPA. It's the GAA who are in the driving seat, and they ultimately control the finances in and around the sport, including the GPA.
Well, I definitely agree that the GAA could be a far more socialist organisation. There's no reason why we shouldn't have ticket prices the envy of other sports right across the world, and we haven't gone down that route, and I don't know why. But sticking with the GPA for a second, I want to throw you a point made here by Bernard Flynn. He was on our morning show, OTB AM. And I think this would be a common point made by lots of people across the GAA. And I just want to get clarification from you on this. So the GPA's turnover is €7.5 million as of 2019. Government grants make up about 3 million of that. The GAA deal, which is 15% of revenues from the GAA, goes to the GPA. So that 15% is about 3 million as of last year. And then they raise about 600 grand themselves, which is about 8% of revenue. But on that point of the money coming from the GAA to the GPA and the independence of the GPA as a result, here's Bernard Flynn speaking this morning. Have a listen.
The biggest problem at the moment, the GPA are compromised. The wages are paid effectively by Croke Park. So you cannot be an independent body. You can't act independently. Paul Flynn has come in, who I would have had great respect for and high hopes for him in his role. I've been a little bit disappointed so far that maybe lack of leadership, lack of conviction on a few issues. That might change, but I do believe Croke Park have the GPA exactly where they want them.
So let's deal with this point, because this comes up all the time. Are the GPA compromised as a result of the deal they have done with the GAA financially?
Well, of course they are. But the reason that there's a financial transaction is that there's a give and a take. And that's what people must remember. And I remember back in the day, Daisy actually took counsel from Gerry Adams at one point. And I remember the advice that came back was, if you're going to go in and you're going to take the dollar, make sure you get what you're looking for. You know, go in hard and strike that deal once, because you will only do it once. So that ship has sailed. And the deal that was cut between the GAA and the GPA was financially good for the GPA, but strategically it was brilliant for the GAA. And that's the nature of compromise on both sides. It's cost the GAA money. It's cost the GPA, let's say, call it clout or perception of clout. But that's the nature of the beast. There's no other way to do this.
Okay, so perception of clout. I mean, is perception reality here? Does it mean if it comes to something like the fixtures that the GPA can't kick up a fuss the way they might like to? And why not? I mean, if they have this 15% of revenue locked in, then I would have thought that would have given them a certain independence to kick up a fuss on issues like the fixtures.
It's also a valid point, but I guess there's an element of psychology here. I mean, they're fully aware that they're receiving enormous sums of money from the GAA. So with the best will in the world, that will impact. Because the relationship we had with Croke Park back in the day, it was very touchy. And, you know, I was bad cop, Desi was better cop, and then somebody else was good cop. And we literally went at each other across the table. It was a phenomenal time, but that's not what this is anymore.
Yeah.
And
sorry to interrupt, Donald, do you think
civil service?
Yeah, do you think the current player would be better served by that kind of approach as opposed to the whiff of the civil service now?
It's hard to say, because you're not really comparing apples with apples. A deal was done, and that deal was done to the best of the abilities of those involved at the time. And it's been honoured by both sides. And if mistakes were made, and I don't know enough about the internal mechanisms right now, so I couldn't really speak with great conviction, but that was the time, the deal was the time to put all of these issues to bed. Whether, you know, as you move forward, individuals and leadership changes within the organisation, and of course personalities come into play, and that will certainly, I would imagine, you know, determine how certain things are approached. But that's normal in any walk of life. So I don't accept that the deal wasn't a good one. I think it was. But listen, I think it was probably a better deal for the GAA long term, truth be told. And that's what you're seeing. But, you know, that's business. That's how commerce works. And it's also how the GAA works.
And so why was it a better deal for the GAA?
Well, I mean, it gives them control over it. And you know, when we were agitating and we were outside, it's very, very difficult to control that. I mean, they thought individually that I was a complete antichrist or some type of renegade. And you know, they made overtures to me to sort of buy me over. And when that was rebuked, they didn't quite know what to do, because it wasn't about money at that point, and certainly not for me individually. So they do business in a certain way, and now the GPA has entered an agreement that is pretty much on the GA's terms, and that's why that large sum of money is going across the table, because the GA are getting something meaningful out of it. And, that's the trade. That's how the business of sport works. That's why athletes do endorsements, and that's essentially what this is. The GPA are endorsing the GA by taking that money.
Okay. Have you any concrete example of a way in which the GPA is compromised on an issue and is not acting the way its members feel it should? Like, so we're talking here in broad terms, and it's a bit compromised, and this is a good deal for the GA. So is there anything from the last 24 months where the GPA might have acted differently if it wasn't in some way compromised?
Listen, I think one of the big problems, obviously fixtures continuously comes up, but I don't think anybody's come up with a solution for that. And the reality is the GPA can only do so much. And, they're not going to flip that on its head overnight. I will always stand behind what's best for players. And I think the majority of people would agree with me on that. But the club county, that relationship it's abnormal in the context of sport.
Yeah.
And it's abnormal because you essentially have what is, for want of a better term, a professional code and an amateur code. And they're not good bedfellows. And there is no solution to that without some type of seismic shift. Let's be honest. And that's the big problem. And that's not a GPA problem. That's a GA problem.
No, totally agree. What could the GPA do? I mean, well, see, in a way, ultimately, if the GPA is just sticking to its mandate, which is looking after the elite players, then we're pretty quickly we're talking about professionalism, aren't we? We're talking about pay for play and a complete separation of club and county.
Well, a part of me has always believed that that's inevitable. And a big part of that reasoning is that the GA will not stop down this very commercial line that they've taken. So the sport is very well run at a senior management level when you look at the business of the GA. But the reality is it could be brilliantly run. It could do even better. And I had a call 2 weeks back with a number of my old colleagues from the IMG days, Mark McCormick's stable. Some of them who have now gone on to be leaders in the world of sport and business around the world.
Yeah.
And I remember one of them in particular, David McConnell, who was one of the top TV executives in the world for many a year in sport. And he called me one day and he said, "Donald, how do we own hurling?" And I says, "Dave, you can't." He had Irish heritage, and he said this is the greatest sport he'd ever seen. It's the greatest made-for-television sport he'd ever seen, and he was completely blown away by it. And this was a guy who's done deals on any sport you could choose to throw a ball at. And I said, "Dave, it's not going to happen." And it took some time for him to comprehend why that couldn't happen. But the reality is the GA, they have not fulfilled the promise and the enterprise of the sport that they have from a commercial basis. So you've got this half-assed approach, which looks, I mean, in Irish terms and domestic terms, it's very good. But there is so much more the GA could be doing, and they could be doing an awful lot better for county boards, and they could even the keel a little bit more than we're seeing at the moment. But they don't want to do those things, and they've never wanted to do those things. We offered to put a structure together that would equalise counties and batch sponsorships. So if you're going to sponsor the Dubs, you'll take a B and a C team from a different pool to really try and even things out a little bit, because it's not fair. It's elitist. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
And, how do you change that? I said again, you come back to the GAA. It's all on their doorstep.
Yeah. So, well, that's a really interesting point. So that would strike me as an issue. If the GPA can't figure out the fixtures, well, that is a tricky area and maybe fair enough. But take the imbalance. And Paul Flynn last November talked about now trying to secure, what was the phrase he used, an uncertainty of outcome, i.e. let's stop Dublin winning the championship every year. And the Australian rules had embarked on this back in the 80s. And Paul Flynn said that might take 10 odd years to accomplish. In the midst of the last 15 years, we've seen crazy imbalances in funding. So like that suggestion that you make there, that if you're going to sponsor Dublin, well, you have to sponsor a Leitrim as well, and you try and even things up. Surely the GPA should have been at the forefront of that. Should have been saying, we represent the players of Leitrim as much as the players of Dublin. And it should have been like a red line issue. We are like, this is not a negotiation. We're out on strike unless we do this. We're looking after all our members. Is that the kind of issue where, you know, Bernard Flynn makes the point they're a bit compromised? Is that an example of where the GPA are not taking a lead, and they really should be, if they were serious about what their business here? Because otherwise I don't know what they're in the business of trying to do.
Well, I can tell you, we tried very vigorously to make that happen. We sat in Croke Park with Liam Mulvihill and Dermot Parr, and we said, we can do this. You know, we can. And I said to Dee Parr, I said, this can be your idea. Here it is. You can have it.
Yeah.
But you got to do something, because 10, 15, 20 years from now, this is going to be, no one thought it would go to the extent that it has. And I spoke to my cousin James McCartan today, and, you know, reminds me of him on television 5-6 years ago saying, you know, God, the Dubs are going to lord us for 5 years.
Yeah.
He came off the TV that night, told me the next day, I actually think it's going to be 10. I was just afraid to say it out loud. And that's where we are now. And that's systematic. It's been created by the structures that the GAA have put in place. They've let county boards wither on the vine. And with that, they've let, you know, great players, you know, fade away. And they don't care.
And how culpable is the GPA in all of that?
Well, I can tell you, at the time, we went to war on that issue. We were very, very adamant that something had to be done. Now, we were still outside the tent, and you know, we kind of didn't have a pot to piss in at the time, so it's not like we had huge resources. But we looked at all of those things in great detail, and we presented options, and they were just brushed aside.
Ignored.
But I think now we're seeing that an issue like that is probably even more compelling and possibly more interesting. We also agitated, I felt for a long time, the GAA should have had its own television channel. You know, they love building infrastructure. Well, you know, how great would it be if every club and county ground in the country had the ability to broadcast live? You could go on there as a member of the GAA and watch any game for free, because the television rights, the way they've carved that up, is pure professional. There's nothing amateur about those deals.
Yeah, sure. And so when you say there, for instance, on that sponsorship issue, that we pushed for it and we fought for it, and at that stage you were outside the tent. So now that the GPA is inside the tent, in effect, is it more influential? Is it more powerful? Are they having the same robust discussions, do you suspect, at the moment about the issue of funding and you know, like, kind of throwing their weight around a bit? That's the thing that's hard for us to deduce on the outside at the moment.
Well, you also have to know your way around this. There probably aren't very many people in the GPA. There aren't very many people in Ireland who have a very clear understanding of how sport works and how to rebuild a sport strategically from a commercial level, for example. So what I'm talking about there, that's a process that was used, and I saw it, you know, the great Mark McCormick that I worked for, he's the one that I took my schooling from to understand everything from television rights right down to licensing of players' names. So you need to have a holistic understanding of how a sport functions as a commercial entity. If you don't have that, you're pissing against the wind, because you're just not in a position to understand exactly what can and cannot work. But there isn't anything that hasn't been done. All the examples are out there. And the GAA do a very good job of going a la carte on that. They generate a huge amount of money, sure, but the reality is they could generate more. And part of them probably doesn't want to, because they can manage the heat that they're taking for where they are right now. But if I'm, you know, where the GPA is now, and if you're on a footing that allows you to really address this issue, you either propel forward or you wind it back in, and you take sponsors and commercial entities out of the game altogether. You clean it out, and that will reduce the income, and that will equalise. But the only way you equalise amongst counties is send more money out from a central source, or reduce, you know, the bag of money overall. And, you know, right now they're kind of stuck in the middle. And
do you think the GPA has influence, big influence?
I don't know the answer to that, because I'm not involved. Obviously, it's been a long time since I have been. But if you're receiving funds to the tune of several million euros, you know, you're a big player. You're a significant player. There's no question that you have a voice. But the GAA are not great at listening. They never have been. So, I mean, that's not going to change anytime soon, is it?
Well, I mean, but what would you... The obvious point to make is that the GPA have the players. So on literally any issue, they can call a halt to things and get their way very quickly, no? I mean, nobody wants to go on strike, but I would have thought they can say, look, championship doesn't happen on issues X, Y, and Z, and we sort it out.
Well, it always comes down to the same thing. You know, if you get to the Saturday night before an All-Ireland final, and the Dubs decide we've won 7 in a row, we need to change this. These are our demands. You can be damn sure something will happen. You know, Mick O'Dwyer did it with Kerry back in the 80s. He was told to not show up with the Adidas kit, and he said, "Well, then maybe we won't." And that's you need a Micko, and you need the manager, you need the team, and you need the moment to attack them. And I'm not sure, you know, are the Dubs or the big teams, are they going to vote against themselves?
Yeah.
I don't think they are. And, you know, at the end of the day, players they're competitive animals. And yes, they care about their fellow players and they need to have teams to play against. But, you know, it's so one-sided now at the moment that, I mean, the imbalance, we even see it in Ulster. You look at the development that, you know, Tyrone have put in place. And, you know, the rest of us are just so far behind, it's frightening. But this is the system.
Yeah. So 80% of the money they accrue across a year is spent on welfare programs. And, you know, be it addiction issues or counselling or medical services, all of that stuff is up and running, and career advice, and that's all great. What's the biggest issue in the GAA that the GPA over the next 12 months should be saying, this is the thing we're going to sort out, this is what we're here to do?
Well, I mean, if you're asking me what I would do if I was back in there, what I would try to do is an equalisation process. I would try and even the ship a bit, because the way it's going at the moment, it's catastrophic for competition, and it's only going to get worse. And people say, yeah, but, you know, Kerry will come back. And you know, the reality is the GAA has never seen an entity like Dublin. You know, Dublin, the county board is extremely well run. They've got, you know, great, you know, commercial new in place now. They're the real deal, and there's no other county like them. So that is where I would start. I would look for a policy of equalisation, and I would make sure that I understand what that looks like over a 5 to 10 year period, and plan it like a business plan, because this is what it is, and this is the environment we're now in.
And one last point, Donald. It was mentioned today that they'll look at trying to reduce the 31 hours that an inter-county player is giving to the game. It was in an ESRI study recently, and they're looking to reduce that. So how do we go about doing that? Is that something the GPA should be doing? Is that something that Kieran McGeeney in his heyday would have wanted?
Well, sure, we looked at that. We got the actuaries involved to look at how much effort and time was going in, and what a player essentially gave up if you were to monetize that over the lifetime of a career. And it's enormous. It's absolutely enormous. But you're talking about competitive athletes. The last thing they want to do is take a step back. And again, the GAA structures do not allow them to do that, because if they take a step back at county level, they'll take another step forward with the club. I mean, there's just no getting away from it. And the number of teams that a lot of these lads are playing for, that hasn't changed in 30 years. I mentioned James McCartan. I remember we sat down when we were at Queen's University. He was playing for down under 21s, seniors, Ulster. He was playing for Ireland. He was playing Freshers and Sigerson with Queen's all at the same time. It's absolutely criminal, but that hasn't changed, and that's 30 years ago.
But that's on the GPA too, no?
But is it? You're back to the fixtures, and you're back to the fact that everybody has to buy into it. And the fact that there are no contracts and there is no currency per se, that's why if you present a county player into the club system, then that'll gobble them up too. So, you know, the problem is in other sports, the players are viewed as assets. They're on the balance sheet, but the GAA doesn't have a balance sheet. And it certainly doesn't have one that recognises the value of players. And I'll come back to it again. That's, you know, that's on their doorstep. But if the GPA could agitate for equalisation, you've either got to go back or forward. But right now, this stalemate has been what it is, and it's been how it is since I can remember. And it doesn't seem to be improving.
Donald, thanks so much. Brilliant insights. We might pick up the conversation again. I suspect it's not going anywhere anytime soon. Donald O'Neill, a founding member of the GPA. Thanks again.
Not at all.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
The Sunday Paper Review on Off the Ball.
When he wants to do something, he does it. A hugely impressive person, apart from being obviously a brilliant golfer.
My cousins disliked their dog so intensely that they renamed it Scalacci.
Yeah.
And the dog was called Scalacci from then on.
It's a great piece of journalism. That sums up what he's like. The intro to this is just brilliant. He is an absolute control freak.
Digesting the best stories on the back pages every Sunday afternoon on Off the Ball.
The OTB Brief. Everything you need to know about sport every morning. Need to get on top of the day's sports news? Well, the OTB Brief is the only sports update you'll need every morning. With all the breaking stories, post-match reaction.
I'm doing my bit to help him, but he's got to do it.
And the best bits from Off the Ball, all in a 10-minute podcast.
The bulking up, maybe it makes him a bit more stable, but look, I saw it on the range a year ago.
The OTB Brief, online every morning from 7 a.m. on otbsports.com or the OTB Sports app.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
And you're very welcome along to OTB AM. It is 7:57 AM here. If you've just joined us or if you just subscribed to the podcast, then you've missed Donald O'Neill in conversation with Joe last night talking about the GPA. We're going to hear from the GPA's Chief Executive, Paul Flynn, a little bit later on in the programme, and we'll talk about what Donald O'Neill had to say after that as well. It is a pretty busy show for you this morning. We're going to be doing Deal or No Deal, looking at a full back pages about what's going to happen. It looks like some agents have begun to find some information about what is imminent for their players, and they're starting to panic a little bit, particularly if, say, you were the agent of the goalkeeper, the current goalkeeper at Chelsea, who isn't going to be the goalkeeper at Chelsea for much longer, according to all the papers. 087 180 180 is the WhatsApp number. Oh, good morning to you. How are you?
Very well, Ger. How are you?
I'm very well. What's going on?
Not much now. Not much. Just looking forward to that Deal or No Deal later, where we've got a compressed transfer season where everything is going to happen very quickly. And I think it's fair to say that the pandemic is going to have an impact on some things, but it's probably not going to have an impact on the volume. People are just going to spend 70 million instead of 80 million on certain things, and on we go.
Transfer window doesn't close until October, right?
It's true, but I guess people want to get it done before pre-season.
But you say that now, right? And you and me have a little bit of common sense. I mean, okay, your case is a little bit doubtful. Sometimes we'll see. But anyway, my point is that these clubs are going to look at that and go, why am I going to pay this player now? I don't have to pay him till October. I don't have to get this deal done until I find out whether or not there are going to be fans back in the stadium. I can see this being the worst, the longest, the most protracted football transfer window of all time. And we're starting Deal or No Deal now. And by the end of September, the middle of October, we'll be like, why did we do that? Why are we stuck with this Deal or No Deal?
I think it's good news for us, because at least it means that other transfer targets will have to be spoken about. Agents will be busy trying to bring things over the line. We are completely at the behest of agents with this slot. If they're not talking, if they're not trying to drum up a bit of interest for their player, we don't have the leaks that come out and the well-sourced transfer stories. So pandemic or no pandemic, and as you said, willingness or lack thereof to actually pay a player means that the agents will have to work extra hard. And that's good for two reasons. First of all, it's good to work the agents a bit harder than they previously had to work. They need to earn their ridiculous crust that they make every year. And second of all, it's great content. I mean, we're going to have so many more leaks coming out, so many more transfer rumours coming out over the next little while. You're right, we'll probably be sick of it in a week, but that needs to be a big selection of stories.
Somebody's WhatsApping me there, apologies. I'm going to mute that. Fulham take on Cardiff City tonight in the second of the Sky Bet Championship playoffs after Brentford won through last night against Swansea. I'm very interested in the Brentford story, and we're going to do something on it over the next few days. But one of the Irish links that there is with the game tonight is obviously the fact that Harry Arter is on the books at Fulham. He was on the show last night. A wide-ranging interview that lasted about 25 minutes. We're just going to play a clip now from the conversation that he was having about the fallout that he had with Roy Keane. So have a look about Harry Arter talking about Roy Keane. We'll talk about this off the back of it.
I regarded it as a lack of respect. purely for no reason, to be honest. It's not something that I would like to go back onto, but, at the time it was uncalled for. I'm not the sort of lad that would ever fake an injury. And the ironic thing about it was that it was in the middle of the summer. I could have been on, it was when we played France and USA, and it was in the middle of the off-season. So, I was thinking to myself, if I'm faking an injury, I wouldn't be sitting in a hotel. The last thing I want to be doing is sitting in a hotel injured when I'm in the middle of my summer. So it was just I guess it was a misunderstanding. Roy got it totally wrong with why he thought I was injured, or maybe the injury itself, he didn't realise the extent of what it was. And I genuinely now put it down to misunderstanding. I know he's done a few interviews since, and he's name-checked me and Stephen Ward and John Waters, but, it's something that I would never want to get involved in. It is what it is. I've always tried my hardest. I wasn't prepared to let someone accuse me of faking an injury, and if you look at it from an obvious outset, if I'm faking an injury, I wouldn't be doing it in the off-season when I could be on holiday. I certainly wouldn't be sitting in a hotel in Dublin. I would be on a beach somewhere enjoying the sun. So I was disappointed with that whole situation. But, for me and Roy spoke about it a good 4 or 5 months after, and to me it was finished.
Right, okay. So you did speak and you did put it to bed?
Yeah, put it to bed, yeah. I made it clear to me and Roy hadn't spoke. I didn't want to go home mid-trip. I was really disappointed with being accused of that. I decided just to not cause a fuss. I didn't want to storm out or anything like that. So I stayed for the rest of the trip, even though I made it clear to Martin that I wasn't happy with it, out of respect to Martin more than anyone, to be honest. I didn't want to just leave midway through the week before the game, so I decided to stay, and I kind of made a decision then that, I need to take a time away from this. It was something I wasn't prepared to accept at the time. And then eventually me and Roy got round to speaking, and it was done.
Just in case anybody is in any doubt, Roy Keane takes accusations of faking injury very seriously indeed. The civil war in Irish football started with what he says was an accusation of faking injury. So in terms of grievous insults, you could put that right up there with absolutely anything that you can think of. The worst thing that you can say to anybody, and then in Roy's world, accusing somebody of faking injury is actually even worse than that. It's so bad that you would not play in a World Cup that you dragged your team to when you were one of the best players in the world and maybe had a chance of winning it. You wouldn't play in that World Cup if somebody accused you of faking injury. So it's pretty serious.
You'd have to wonder what was actually going through his head when he makes that accusation.
Don't say it. Oh, you said it. Oh, you got to live with it now. Don't say it.
Really
That's the internal monologue. Don't say it. Oh, you did it.
And I think according to the Stephen Ward WhatsApp, that actually is supported by the fact that he kind of let slip a little bit of a whisper, and Jonathan Walters came after him and was like, if you're going to say something, say it to my face, don't mutter it under your breath. So maybe that was part of the inner monologue where I was like, don't say it, just whisper it. And he ended up whispering something, and then that was the start of it.
Jonathan Walters, we had him on the show recently, and his hair has grown back. Like he doesn't have the shaved head anymore, and he looks less imposing. He looks like he's kind of, he's like a civilian again, as opposed to the chiseled from marble shaved head. I would not have gone up against Jonathan Walters for any money. Nothing would have made me go up against Jonathan Walters with the threat of physical confrontations. This is a very strange environment that we're thinking about here, as the environment for a couple of friendlies in the off season.
And as Arthur made the point last night, why would you waste your time faking injuries at a training camp in the middle of the summer? Just don't go. You wouldn't show up if you didn't want to play. Of course you wanted to play. I kind of feel that Harry Arthur's a little bit in the crossfire whenever I hear this story, that it was very much a John Walters versus Roy Keane thing, and they had a bit of history at Ipswich. Jonathan Walters famously said that, he cowered out of actually giving him a fine to his face and ended up sending it to his house instead. I kind of feel that was the real beef that was going on here, and that Harry Arter was the guy who happened to be sitting on the bench beside John Walters and was like, oh no, I'm in the middle of this thing as well. Oh God, he's calling me an effing P word and C word and whatever else was allegedly said at the time. Why are you saying all these things to me? I'm just getting a massage here in the physio room. Why has he now walked away from me? Why does it feel like that he now hates me? You have to feel for him in this situation. Like he really does kind of speak as if Martin O'Neill was very good to him last night, but at the same time, where was the manager in all this? When there's an assistant wreaking havoc everywhere, calling players every name under the sun. This is not like some light jibing, like get your act together. Like he used the worst words under the sun. Like there could be no possible motivational factor for using the C word and directing it towards one of your players because you fear that they are faking injury.
The highly paid spin doctors in the military came up with the phrase collateral damage to, it's a nice way of saying we killed a bunch of civilians. We murdered them accidentally here, but we don't really care about it. It's just collateral damage, and they could, collateral damage was X number, and it's like, that seems like an acceptable number. Collateral damage in the Roy Keane versus Johnny Walters war was Harry Arter just lying there, bloodied. on the couch. I can't. I'm dead now.
Well, we shouldn't be laughing. Like, I mean, I laughed there, but I really should not be laughing. Like, I listened to that piece, and like, how could that not have an impact on you for quite a long time? Especially if you've done any bit of reading into what Irish football means to people and who the greatest heroes are. For Roy Keane, like, I mean, it's bad enough if it's any assistant saying this stuff to you, but it's Roy Keane saying that stuff to you, and you are legitimately injured. It must be absolutely soul-crushing.
It is a good question, though, about Martin O'Neill. At this point, he had obviously just decided that he only wanted players who were able to take whatever it was that Roy Keane was handing in. It's funny that Martin O'Neill had like not a great relationship at the end with Brian Clough, where he was one of those players who needed a slightly different approach from Clough, it seems. And yet, that's the aspect of man management that he brought onto his staff, the role that he gave Keane, it seems. That's like, it's cognitive dissonance for me.
But
how does that work? Why are you doing that?
And also, you can certainly say, you could certainly make a case that perhaps Martin O'Neill knew nothing about this until the WhatsApp comes out. Like, you can argue whether that's likely or not, but that's a potential case. What about the other people around the camp at this point? Surely another member of staff hears this.
Yeah.
Like, in a wager, I can actually kind of accept the players being like, oh my God, kind of frozen to do nothing.
You're not going to go and tell tales on Roy Keane, though, are you?
No, exactly. Well, you see, that's the thing.
But if you're a member of staff, you're not.
If you're a member of staff, exactly. If you're a member of staff, I think that there is a responsibility on you to at least have a word with Martin O'Neill. And maybe Martin O'Neill and Roy Keane had a relationship where other people felt that they couldn't go to Martin about Roy Keane things.
They're going on mandates to the Super Bowl together.
There you go.
Like, what do you... Here, your best buddy, who you love, just had this amazing blazing row. Roy, Ger's after telling me that you've just had a big row with Harry Arter. What happens then? What do you think Roy Keane does to that person?
So it's one of two things here where Martin O'Neill was completely unaware of it, which is kind of unlikely, and he could be unaware of it because of the rest of his staff and players naturally not wanting to tell tales on Roy Keane. The second situation here, and potentially more likely outcome, is that Martin O'Neill did know about what was going on and thought to himself, this is good old school management.
Maybe.
And let's proceed with this. And by my count, there has to be some responsibility on the manager of the team for allowing this sort of thing to slide, because that's exactly what happened. The second altercation with Arter does not happen unless if the first one is properly dealt with and properly looked after. But this thing is allowed to fester and explode, and Harry Arter, and I would say his personal confidence and his international career for a time is hugely affected by this being allowed to fester within the Ireland camp.
And Harry Arter seems like a lovely human being, who probably didn't need this in his life. particularly. If anybody is unfamiliar with this is the whole story that emerges from the Stephen Ward WhatsApp that did the rounds. That was undeniably Stephen Ward. It wasn't like there was no mid-Atlantic accent. There was no voice. It was like 100% Stephen Ward's voice, and it was like, oh God, lads, thanks to my mates for sending that round as well. But a brilliant storyteller. Like Stephen Ward has a big future ahead of him as an after-dinner speaker and a raconteur is the word I was looking for. He has a big career ahead of him at that. 10 minutes past 8 here this morning. If you want to get involved in the conversation, you can get in touch with us. 087 918 180 is the WhatsApp number. OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good mornings. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. I'll tell you what's coming up. The Chief Executive Officer of the Gaelic Players Association, Paul Flynn, is going to join us in about 10 minutes' time. We've got the sports pages and top stories coming your way. Galway Races tips with John Duggan. The NBA bubble wrap with Ryan Farmer-Jones, and Deal or No Deal with Phil Egan coming your way just before the end of the show this morning. Shane Hannon, good morning to you. How are you?
Morning, lads. Keeping well, and yourselves?
What's going on?
That whole pile. You skirted very close there, lads. I thought you were going to say the S word, that small island in the Western Pacific, but you managed to avoid saying it.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, look, everybody knows where the accusation or did or didn't happen.
Yeah, we don't have to say the name ever again, please. It's only been 18 years, but it feels like a lot more. But should we get started with Harry Arter's club, I guess?
Go for it. Yes.
Keeping on those lines. You mentioned it already, but Fulham, his club, take on Cardiff City tonight for the right to meet Brentford in the Championship playoff final. So could well be a London club again in the Premier League next season. Scott Parker's Fulham take a 2-0 lead into that second leg at Craven Cottage. Brentford beat Swansea 3-1 at Griffin Park last night, winning that tie 3-2 on aggregate. Brentford, of course, said goodbye to their home of 116 years, Griffin Park, with last night the final game to be played there. Their manager, Thomas Frank, says it was a fitting way to end their time at the stadium.
We know this is we had the final meeting in the dressing room. Let's do everything we can to make it a magical moment. We can't not win today, the final game.
Meanwhile, it's reported that Troy Parrott could be set for a loan move to Championship club Millwall. The Republic of Ireland teenage striker looks set for a season-long stint at the New Den. Women's world number one in tennis, Ashley Barty, has pulled out of the US Open in New York at the end of August due to fears over the coronavirus pandemic. Australian Barty may still defend her French Open title, though, in September. Ireland take on world champions England in a one-day cricket international at the Rose Bowl in Southampton from 2 o'clock this afternoon. Ireland will be without Mark Adair for this opening match. The seamer is still recovering from an ankle injury. Harry Tector and Curtis Camphor could make their ODI debuts in the biosecure bubble in Southampton. All-rounder Camphor was born in South Africa but qualifies through an Irish grandparent. Irish skipper Andrew Balberney says this is what it's all about.
From our point of view, if you can't get yourself up for an ODI against the world champions, even though there's nobody here, but there's going to be a huge audience around the world, and it's an opportunity to show where this Irish team is at. And, you know, it's a new enough team in the sense of experience. We've got a lot of young guys coming through, and it's Ireland taking on England. For any Irish kid growing up, whether it was rugby or soccer, that was the fixture you wanted to play in, and cricket's no different. And I think, you know, the English boys look like they're firing pretty well, and we're going to have to be at our best. And my job is to make sure that I get the guys going.
Rory McIlroy, Shane Lowry and Graham McDowell are all in the field for the World Golf Championship St Jude Invitational in Memphis, Tennessee, which starts today. McIlroy will tee off in a group alongside Webb Simpson and Jordan Spieth, while Lowry is with Tyrrell Hatton and Dustin Johnson. On the European Tour, Paul Dunne, Jonathan Caldwell, Gavin Moynihan and Cormac Sharvin play in the Hero English Open. That's at the Forest of Arden in Birmingham. And Miguel Angel Jimenez will make European Tour history, that is, when he tees off at that event today. The Spaniard will pass 2002 Ryder Cup winning captain Sam Torrance by making a record 707th tournament appearance. Not bad. The Galway Hurdle is the feature race on day 4 of race week at Ballybrit. The market is headed by Felix Deji and Wonder Leish. That race goes to post at 6:45 this evening. The first of 8 races there is off at 4:45. While over at Goodwood, Donegal O'Brien saddles favourite Fancy Blue in the Group 1 Nassau Stakes. That is at 3:15. Some rugby union news. Exeter will retain their Chiefs branding, but will retire club mascot Big Chief following a board review. A supporters' petition had gathered more than 3,500 signatures, calling for an end to their harmful imagery and branding. The rugby union side decided that the use of the logo was in fact, quote, highly respectful and had a long history with people in the area. While finally, for me this morning, lads, 5-time winner Ronnie O'Sullivan believes snooker players are being treated like lab rats at this year's World Championship. Some fans are being allowed into the Crucible in Sheffield, where social distancing measures will be in place to protect against the coronavirus. But O'Sullivan says he doesn't think it's a risk worth taking. That tournament, of course, gets underway in Sheffield tomorrow.
Had you thought about scalping any of those tickets and being one of Ronnie's lab rats?
No, look, I was tempted. Obviously, the last 2 years I've been there, but it's a perfect year, I think, to sit home and watch. I think they're doing it in bubbles. You can be in groups of 4 only, and you have to be no more than 2 households. So you can sit in groups of 4, and you have to know each other. You have to wear masks outside the venue, but once you take your seat, you can take the masks off. So they have measures in place, but look, it's a danger, probably not worth taking, and there's a lot of players not happy with it. So interesting to see how it goes.
How much crack is the Crucible?
Oh, it's great. It doesn't sound like it would be great, but I mean, there's a bar right outside the entryway. It's a small venue, so it's quite compact. But there's loads to do. Like, the city comes alive, Sheffield comes alive around that time. You don't know who you'll see. I mean, I was chilling with Jason Quigley one of the years. He's good friends with John Higgins, of course, 4-time world champion.
Is he?
Yeah, really good friends apparently. I don't know how he came to meet him, but I think he. See, Jason would have been training in the Ingle gym in Sheffield, so he would have got to know a few of the players, but Higgins was one of the players he ended up meeting and befriending. So you don't know who you'll see. I think Stephen Fry as well is a big snooker fan. He kind of mills around. I was sitting beside a couple of the Sheffield Wednesday players in the media seats as well one of the years. So it's a random event, but a lot of fun.
Unless it's the Sheffield Wednesday team from the mid-90s, I don't care.
Yeah, nobody cares.
If it was David Hurst and Chris Waddle, I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Carlton Palmer, I'll accept. John Sheridan, yeah, just about, but... yeah, current Sheffield Wednesday players whose names I know.
Yeah, I didn't know who they were, to be fair. I'm sorry.
Shane, good stuff. Thanks very much. Peter M on YouTube says, even after all this, I'd love to see Roy Keane back in management. It'd be gas crack, give him the West Ham job. The trouble is, Roy Keane absolutely needs like one of the big jobs in world football where the players can, look back at him and go, yeah, I can do that, as opposed to the mediocre players that he'd be with now.
No. There is, like, the only way that you have this sort of, I guess, I know this unexpected success story in modern football is like a Zinedine Zidane type. And let's not forget, when Zidane made his comeback, he was wearing 3/4 length jeans with no socks and white shoes. He is down with the kids. You need to have some level of that to be able to get through and actually, use your greatness as a footballer as an impressive stat to affect your team positively. Roy Keane is just aggression all the way.
I also think that Zidane benefits from the fact that you can look up YouTube and see him doing amazing things, whereas with Roy Keane it was like, I passed the ball 1,000 times in this game and completely killed the opposition, but there's no 8-second YouTube highlight that makes me look amazing, apart from that bit where I killed Alf-Inge Haaland and had that row with Patrick Vieira and did this thing Shearer, and it's like, okay, I mean, I'm not just that, man. I'm something else as well.
It's punditry as well. If you YouTube Roy Keane, it's all punditry for the first 5 pages now, and then you get into his footballing, which may be kind of a symptom of what the real problem is. But also as well, one thing we might be forgetting here is that maybe Zinedine Zidane's a good coach.
18 minutes past 8 this morning here on OTB AM. Time for us to turn back to the Gaelic Players Association. They released their 2019 annual report yesterday. They held their AGM last night, and in between that, we sat down with Paul Flynn yesterday afternoon. Here's how the conversation went. All right, we have Paul Flynn, the Chief Executive of the GPA, with us. The AGM of the Gaelic Players Association is out. The annual report has been published on their website, so there's an opportunity for everybody to kind of parse through exactly where we are at the moment and where the organisation is making progress and where they see the future going. Before I get into all of that, Paul, the circumstances for the last couple of months when you've been preparing the annual report for 2019 is actually circumstances from a different world, where there was a championship and there was vibrant sponsorship and there were bums on seats and there was broadcasting deals that were all heading one direction. So in terms of the impact that COVID has had and what it might have for the future of your organisation as well as the wider world, what's your kind of instinct about where things are going at the moment?
Thanks, Ger. It's good to be on as well. I think it was very strange to be delivering on an annual report of 2019. It feels like a very long time ago, considering what we've just gone through and what we continue to go through in relation to living with COVID-19 in our lives. Absolutely no different to any organisation, sport or otherwise. And there will be implications on the GAA, as we all know, and as well reported, but also on the GPA, as we have a partnership in relation to the commercial revenue share there. So we are keen throughout COVID and since the start of it to focus on two things: to make sure that we preserve our cash, but also ensuring that we can deliver our service provision to our players too, and arguably at a time where they need it now more than ever before, because of the implications of COVID is having no difference to the wider society, but also on players also.
Do you expect Sport Ireland to come through with the same level of grants for 2020 as they would have done in previous years? Is that even a conversation at the moment?
Well, we only have a new government, so I'm looking forward to getting in and discussing that with government and with Sport Ireland. But as I'm sure everybody is under no illusions of the implications on the economy based off COVID.
Okay, so we'll keep an eye out to kind of see what's happening. In terms of the annual report, there's obviously a huge interest from the wider GA community in what the direction that the GPA are trending in. And it seems, if I'm looking through the report this morning and looking back at the ESRI report, that fixtures is going to continue to be this thing which seems to be the kind of black hole that draws everybody's attention, and it might actually be the original sin of the GAA is not getting the fixture list corrected at some point. Where does that stand, and where does that fit into all of the rest of the stuff that you end up talking about when the publication happens? What level of importance did the GPA place on fixing the fixtures?
Well, ultimately, Jay, we do three things: player representation, player welfare, and player development. And under player representation, this is top of the agenda. And it has an indirect impact on the player welfare and also on player development. So it's transient across everything that we do. We invested last year heavily into the fixtures task force, which we remain committed to. Because since my first day in this role, probably not knowing a hell of a lot about the difficulties that I faced in relation to fixture reform, I did feel that the only way to find a solution was to have all the different stakeholders in the one room, and we need to find a consensus. And ultimately, that was what happened through the Fixtures Task Force. And the findings of the report have been outlined. There's 3 recommendations. But the next steps of the report were to do a roadshow across the country, outlining the findings to clubs, to counties, getting the feedback, and then outlining a way forward, let's say. Don't get me wrong, there's looking at the fixtures, the findings of the Fixtures Task Force, now through the lens of what we've just experienced, it does make changes, and I believe the next step should be getting the group together again, looking at the learnings from what we've just experienced now to a very condensed season, and then continuing with the road shows that were supposed to be face to face through digital platforms. So we could do it in a much more timely manner, and then we can find a solution that works for all. We certainly don't need there to be unrest amongst the GA community going forward because of fixtures, which we now know we can fix. We can find a solution to.
When it comes to that fixture, sorry, just on that fixture task force, when you said there was a consensus, or at least there was a consensus as part of the ambition, was there one of the options that you had nailed down before coronavirus that was the one that you were going to be really pushing this summer?
There was one 4x8, which was groups of 4x8 and they're linked. But equally, we hadn't done our roadshow. That was my preference. To be fair, we hadn't done our own internal roadshow with the players, and it was built into our AGM. Funny enough, as a workshop in our AGM. But as you're aware, our AGM is through a Teams call, which isn't the right form for us unless we are to adapt it, like I just highlighted there. So again, I think the next steps are to get the group back together, look at it through the lens of COVID. Have we learned anything? Could we amend anything? And then go with the roadshows with the collateral prepared and the information dissected for people to understand. But there could be changes because of, as I said, the more condensed season we're going to experience.
That condensed season has given the opportunity for the club to have a period of time, and then the intercounty is going to have a period of time. Let's assume that the intercounty season goes ahead, and hopefully there'll be even more supporters allowed at those games than we have at the moment. Is that part of the model something that we should actually think about, where there's just a period of exclusivity for clubs, and then after that there's a period where training continues and then the game starts? It seems like we might have stumbled upon something perfect here.
I do believe that this is a good solution for this year. We'll have to look at whether it's the right solution going forward. We have to remember that in every week that there's football or hurling being played this year, inter-county players are asked to play. So when we talk about split seasons, or we talk about whatever model, under every one of the banners or the headings, inter-county players will be asked to play. So you need to ensure that the proper sports science is embedded within it, to ensure that there's load management, there's player welfare, understandings around injury prevention and preparation. And I think that's really, really important. I don't feel that that's fully understood and accepted by the wider GAA community. When we think about, yes, the preparation for intercounty is a greater requirement than club. It's an extra 10 minutes. The players are conditioned to a higher level. And the games of club championship first this year will to prepare them to a certain level. But under no illusions, like training at an intercounty level is like playing any championship game. And that's the level that we're at. And we need to make sure players are given the adequate time, intercounty players, to prepare for the intercounty season. So in a long-winded way, I do believe that we have stumbled along a solution for this year. It would be naive of us and silly of us not to learn from what we've just experienced, and hopefully we can then drive on and progress the fixtures reform.
So there should be some access to intercounty level sports science for intercounty players during a club season. Would that be, I'm saying that they could train with them once a week, as opposed to it being an exclusive window for, I guess, maybe a relaxation of the rules where there's no access to the intercounty management teams and their setups, the players, if this was something that might work into the future, where there was a couple of months a year where you're allowed to train with your county, you're allowed to use their sports science facilities, for want of a better word, and then you can go and continue to play with your clubs. Might that be some kind of hybrid version of what we're seeing this year that might work?
And look, Ger, I think there's a lot of what you just said there that makes is common sense, and I think that needs to come into this. I personally, I believe that we should go with intercounty first, and if you finish your intercounty, then there won't be, you'll be completely free to play with their clubs, and there might be less of what we just experienced over the last number of weeks. But equally, if it was the other way around, or if there was some sort of hybrid, there is, by allowing intercounty players to do a strength and conditioning session in a club period, is no detriment to the club, and to the latter, actually, I'd say. And at the moment, we've no club gyms they're allowed open, but we have intercounty players that aren't allowed to train in the intercounty facility, which is a gym, and they could do it on an evening off from their club activities. They can't access a rehabilitation session with their sports physios and medical teams. So, you know, this is what the environment we're in at the moment, where it's completely split. But I do feel that if we can find a proper solution going forward, we need to ensure that common sense is built into it as well.
How do you feel that you guys have performed in terms of getting that voice out there? Because we're talking about perceptions a good bit here, and it seems as if at the moment you're constantly fighting a battle to explain exactly what your position is. How do you fix that? What's the process for you guys to be a voice that people turn to and go, okay, well, what is your perception on this, and that you get listened to, as opposed to beaten up for your press releases, which kind of seems to be the case at the moment?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's the difference between perception and reality, and unfortunately, reality is different to people's perceptions. My take on this is very clear. Like, our key stakeholder in this is the intercounty players, and because we are the representative body of the intercounty players, the 2%, as some people like to highlight it as, that's our role. We need to continue to represent them, and some of the things, Ger, that we aim to achieve may not appease everyone, but we have to just be happy in the fact that we are representing our core membership, the intercounty players. So I think that's always going to create some level of I'm not going to use conflict a bit strong, but we're not always going to be in agreement with everybody's views of the world, because people will be strong in relation to one side or the other. I think what sometimes gets lost in it, Ger, is that all inter-county players are club players too. They're all delighted to be back with their clubs, training hard, raising the levels of of club championship, club training. It's excellent. Talking to many of them, they're enjoying the bit more space that they have at the moment. But equally, they're high performers here, and they want to get back into that high performing environment and to test themselves against the best. And so, I guess going back to your question, we're the representative body of the inter-county players. Everybody loves the inter-county players, but they hate the GPA or misunderstand the GPA, I'd say. So it's important that we continue just to get our message out there. And that's why, Ger, with our annual report, from my perspective, if everyone wants to go through it and read it and see all the different things that we do for the players, who they do admire, I think they get a greater appreciation for the breadth of what we do. And fixture reform certainly is one of the main items on our agenda, but it's not the only item. And there's a suite of other things that we do across player development and player welfare that maybe people just don't understand fully.
Off the back of the ESRI report last year, the drop quote from Irish Kelly, just to read it out, who was the lead author of the report, she said, unless the underlying drivers that are giving rise to the current inter-county commitment levels are identified and addressed, the knock-on effects identified in this study are likely to be amplified among future generations of players. It's the old adage, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat the mistakes. And essentially, that's the 31 hours that has become kind of again, it's interesting. You guys get blamed for the 31 hours, and yet it's your members who are the ones who are suffering the impact of it. So presumably you guys want fewer than 31 hours to be the level of commitment that is required from inter-county players into the future.
Absolutely, Ger. It's a number that people refer to, and I don't mind who they blame for it. What we need to do is collectively to reduce it. And one of the motions that we're bringing to the floor of the AGM this evening is the idea of you actually might recall from what's a separate motion is in relation to Don Davis, but we'll come back to that. But a second motion we're bringing is around optimal contact hours. And the idea of contact hours is widely recognised in different sports, based off sports science. How many hours per week would a professional athlete train? Obviously, we're not a professional sport, but we can learn from professional sports, like what we do on the pitch, from an S&C perspective and conditioning. We should be embedding that in how inter-county setups are training. And I was a firm believer that when under Jim Gavin's regime, we trained less than every other county, and I still believe that, and it was because it was heavily based in sports science and smart training. And I think if we can do the same with the optimal contact hours, we can reduce the 31-hour requirements based on inter-county players. And hopefully, one of the outcomes of COVID, maybe a positive outcome, is a trend towards working from home, and the impact, or working locally, or working remote, and the impact potentially that can have on players not having to travel the distances that they had to travel, because a lot of that 31 hours in many instances was made up of travelling.
What is the optimal contact hour in your view? I know it's probably a bit of a hunch and that there's going to be research done to actually nail it down, but from your experience, what is that number?
Owen, I'm not going to pretend to know the answer to that question. There's sports scientists out there who will be able to identify that. But I do believe that like four nights a week is the ideal. One strength conditioning, 2 pitch, and 1 weekend, and there's a scope for the strength conditioning to be more localized, and because it is all personal. Your strength conditioning program now is personal to you, and more trends rather than a collective program. So there is opportunities for that session to be done in your own setting. So. But I just think we need to be creative about it, Owen. I think we need to be forward thinking, and one of the key things that we continue to try and embed as a part of our culture in the GPA and inter-county games is balance between a player's personal, professional and their physical life. And to be able to find that balance, we need to create space. And at the moment, Ger, I don't know whether you remember Don Davis's reference to the 31 hours, and he did it in a quite jovial manner, but it doesn't leave a hell of a lot more space when you include sleep and work in there to do anything else. And I think it's important that we understand that, but find solutions to reduce it.
Just on that, Paul, would it be a situation that there is a guideline on whatever the hours would be? So say, I don't know what it could be, 21, 25 hours. Would there then be a mandate from the GPA to say to every county board, this is how much you're allowed to train your team? And if that is the case, how do you implement that? How do you actually ensure that those rules are actually being adhered to? Because I think that was one of the big talking points of recent weeks when Tom Ryan said that players and county boards should be called out for training. And I think that's something that really stuck in the craw of a lot of people, whereas perhaps from the GPA statement, as much criticism as it got, there was a sense of reality in the idea that players need to be insured because there is a culture in the GA of rules being skirted. So in kind of a roundabout way then, if you were to come up with a new contact hours rule, how do you implement it?
Good point, and I think the idea of culture is important, that there needs to be a change in culture overall in the overall association to understand if we are to achieve sustainable amateurism, which is the core of what we believe should be the foundation of the GAA. It needs to be able to strike a balance between all the different elements of it. And one of the things around adherence to rules and adherence to policies is paramount for it to be able to deliver on some of this best practice ideas that other sports do utilise. And I feel that education is important in relation to this also, that if all inter-county setups understood what it is required to perform at the optimal, based off sports science, obviously, that they wouldn't have to overtrain. So I guess that it's just going to take all stakeholders to come together, no different to what we had to achieve over the last number of weeks. County boards, ourselves, the GAA need to work together to be able to strike this balance.
What they do in the NFL, and Don Davis was from the NFL Players Association, is that a union representative will report if the team does a contact session that they're not supposed to do. And also there are people who travel around whose job it is to make sure that the sessions aren't in pads or they're not supposed to be in pads and all that kind of stuff. So how do you police something like this if it does come in? Because you can see this happening really quickly, where there's a general acceptance that this is a big step forward. It'll cost the GA less money, which would presumably get them on board pretty quickly too. So how do you police it?
It's a good, Ger, I'm not entirely certain if you've seen the three motions for this evening, but one of the motions that we have, and that's what I was alluding to earlier on, being brought to the floor this evening is around a confidential disclosure platform. And it's ultimately off the back of the ESRI report and the student report, whereby players are crying out for an off season. So this is for a reporting mechanism to allow players to report non-compliance to the off season. So that was, as I alluded to earlier when I mentioned Don Davis, it was Don who educated me in that platform that the NFL Players Association have. Theirs is around physical contact because of the prevalence of injuries, but equally ours is due to the player welfare, prevalence of injury, but also in relation to downtime and balance. A platform like this could be utilised in that manner. So we can set that up, use it for an off season. If the platform is working and there's engagement with it, that could be then rolled out and used for the contact hours also.
Okay. It all makes, as you say, common sense, and hopefully post-COVID we're all going to get an injection of that. Can I ask you about off-seasons? What do you mean by an off-season? Do you mean an off-season when there's no inter-county, or do you mean there's no club and inter-county so players get a genuine break? What's your definition of that?
Selfishly looking at it from an inter-county player's perspective, I believe that the month of December should be completely off-season. There should be no activity. And that could change based off what happens in fixture reform. But as is, it should be an off-season where guys are just allowed to have complete downtime. The only thing at the moment where that would be impeded is when you're talking about colleges and you're talking about provincials that have been now moved to December, but you would achieve a high proportion of an off season by shutting down inter-county in December. However, by looking at the fixture reform, we have one of the key principles we brought in was around an off season, and it should be paramount to the whole GAA. I think it's not a bad thing for the whole association to shut down for a month.
And that's where some common ground could be found between you guys and the CPA, for example, or you guys and club players, where it's all GAA activity stops and everybody hits a reset button.
Absolutely, and we did come out with a press release in conjunction with the CPA after they decided to step away from the fixtures task force, because we did understand that there's a lot of areas of common ground, and as I highlighted, like all inter-county players are club players as well. But we need to understand that in any season whereby you split it, or you do a hybrid, or you do concurrent, or whatever model it is, inter-county players are asked to play at each one of those. So we just need to make sure that we are protecting the interests of our players.
Paul, could I just ask then on the subject kind of again of affecting change and making sure it actually happens? Like, there's really good ideas in terms of your research, bringing the relative fixture proposals on road shows, researching what the optimal contact hours are for training. To actually affect that change, to actually get that over the line, that can often be a complicated process. You sometimes see great motions, for example, go before Congress and they get defeated. Some people will say that the GPA are too close to the GEA to be able to have the necessary arguments to get these over the line. Is that something that you might have concerns about in the future, that you need to sort of keep a distance from the GEA? But how do you end up doing that if you are quite close to the GEA and essentially funded in part by the GEA?
No, it's a really good question, and I believe in a partnership model, and where there's a respect across the board. We respect them, they respect us, and in any relationship like that, that doesn't mean that we have to agree on every point, and that doesn't mean that we can't push the boundaries. And I believe that we can still do that in a partnership model. No different to some of the policies that we've been trying to bring forward so far, even from last year's AGM. They do take time, and this year in particular, because of COVID, they have been delayed. But one of the other interesting policies we discussed last year was around competitive balance. There hasn't been a hell of a lot spoken about this year in the media spheres, but it's really important from our perspective, is the whole idea of uncertainty of outcome. And that's from learnings that we had from the AFL Players Association. They rolled this out in 2016 because there was, I suppose, a number of teams that were underperforming, and they were trying to bring balance to it. And I believe this would be a fantastic initiative to be rolled out by the GAA from right across the board, but in particular in the inter-county setup. And it could bring greater competitions. And some of it can be done through fixture reform, competition reform, and other can be done through funding and through other mechanisms. So, but they do take time on. There are things in the GAA that take time just purely based off the setup and the Congress and what it takes to change a rule.
And can I just ask then, are you content with that partnership at the moment? And I know that can be kind of an awkward question to ask because you have to work with the GAA quite often, but is that constantly under review? The fact that that partnership doesn't necessarily always have to be a partnership. Sometimes change can be affected if you're outside the tent. Is that always up for consideration with GPA, because it is a constant criticism?
Absolutely, and I do feel the criticism comes because of a lack of understanding. And like even in my tenure in this role, I've had many arguments, public and behind the scenes, with the GAA. But equally, the next day I may have to enter into a room and work on a program of work that we've been trying to get over the line. So that's an understanding between ourselves and the GAA that we're not always going to agree, and we will continue to represent the inter-county players and their interests under the 3 pillars of welfare, development and representation. And back to your point, Ger, earlier on in relation to perception, people won't always agree with what we're trying to achieve, because we represent the inter-county players, and that's just a part of it. But equally, they won't always understand the idea of our relationship with the GAA as well.
Could you just give us a couple of quick sentences on competitive balance and what it is and how it might actually impact games, for example?
Well, ultimately, the idea in the AFL was their North Star, let's call it, was to increase the uncertainty of outcome of games, and that's what they were aiming to achieve. Because there were some teams that were far superior than others, and I think there were only 18 teams within their league. and they wanted to bring balance to it. Other sports do it through different formats like salary caps and financial fair play and so forth. So it's the idea of competitive balance and equalisation strategies within sport are common. We've yet to grasp it within the GAA, but it's something that I feel that we could we would have to radically change it from professional sports, but we take it, the model, the idea, and we learn from it. Things like spending caps for squads, so there's fairness across the board. Team sizes, squads sizes, the format of championships. So there's a number of different ways you could look at it, but a bit like contact hour zone, we don't have all the answers to this, but what we do have is we've a will to find them. And we actually had set up a group to start looking at this on the 19th of March. Unfortunately, we have had to delay it, but it's right on our agenda, and we believe we'll have it completed by the end of the year. But we're going to embed it in the negotiation strategies also.
Okay, so it'll be a conversation to be had at central level with GAA about how, so that players training in counties can feel like they're going to have a crack at something, a meaningful outcome in a competition that they believe they have a chance of winning.
Exactly, Ger.
I think we could all get behind that. Maybe splitting Dublin should be top of the agenda for that one. I mean, that's always something. That's an agenda we like to push on this show, Paul.
Oh, right, sorry, I didn't tune in for that episode.
Paul Flynn, thanks very much for joining us. Best of luck.
Thanks, guys.
OTB AM.
That is not a headline in the papers today. Paul Flynn has not agreed with our naked agenda here, Eoin, that we want to split Dublin in two. And that was the whole point. The whole point of Mount Rushmore, which we laid bare in the final week, was that we would split Dublin in two and it would become inevitable that everybody would see it. So from that little acorn, this agenda that one night in the pub you came up with it. Listen, I know what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to have Dublin split in two.
It was great to hear from former North Dublin footballer Paul Flynn there.
I'm going to run you through the papers. We're going to start with OTBsports.com. US Open forced behind closed doors at Winged Foot. It's the right call, Mr. Crucible. Mr. Hearn, you should be paying attention to what everybody else is doing. So golf behind closed doors there. Dave McMillan returns to Dundalk following Scottish detour. The League of Ireland is back this weekend. A lot of excitement about that, and hopefully it's all going to work out first. There's a whiff of the civil service about it. Co-founder Donal O'Neill on the modern GPA. In fairness, he was very balanced about what they can and can't achieve, and very squarely put the blame back on the door of the GAA. Never would have closed the door on Ireland. Harry Arter's possible return to the Ireland team, and Holders Wexford drawn away to Galway in the FAI Women's Cup. So that's what's on the back of the sports pages this morning for you. I'm going to start very quickly with some of the English papers this morning. My story is bigger than boxing. This is Ruxana Begum, the former Muay Thai world champion, on her battles in and out of the ring. Exeter under fire for refusing to drop Chiefs' name and logo. The only people in the world not getting the memo at the moment are the Exeter Chiefs owners. Horrendous message. No one should have to tolerate the racism Archer has endured. And those two stories are obviously linked. City launch revamp with 20 million Torres. There's a 100 million buyout clause, according to the piece in the London Times this morning, and City have managed to get him for 20 million initially, and that fee will obviously rise depending on how well or otherwise Ferran Torres gets on at City. Self-service presentation for the FA Cup, no handing over of the trophy, and axed the Exeter Chiefs mascot. That's all they've done there. The Telegraph have a remarkable story. I may get leg amputated to make games. This is one of Great Britain's reigning world and European champions in wheelchair basketball. It said he may have to get his left leg amputated to compete in the Paralympics because his level of disability no longer qualifies him to compete in the games. Starting with the Irish Daily Mail this morning, line of duty. Players will get a private hotline to report breaches. This is the GPA story. Inter-county senior footballers and hurlers will be able to ring a confidential hotline and report any breaches of the GAA's closed season and eventually contact hours if they all get adopted. So, and then Munster ready to turn around average year. This is the new signings, new coaches. It's all go at Munster in terms of what their level of expectation is for the rest of the season. I mean, we can talk about that and whether or not that's a bit unfair or if they actually should be. Tab of the morning to you, Eoin. Shirty Sanchez. Do you get this? You don't. That's interesting. That's obviously a phrase that was... you'd need to ask a grown-up, though. You'd need to ask a grown-up about what the Dirty Sanchez was. Shirty Sanchez, Alexis set to refuse Red's return despite Solskjaer wanting him back from Inter.
That was a show on MTV. Yeah, sorry, I didn't. Wasn't it a show on MTV?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I remember that. Yeah.
Anyway, and paying the vast bulk of his staggering 500 grand a week wages. So we'll talk about that in Deal or No Deal. And Hoops Net a keeper. Celtic have captured the Greek goalkeeper Barkas on a 5.5 million deal. Into the other red tops this morning, the Star back page, it's war. A flop Sanchez in United row, and Pep Klopp in fight for 80 million stars. So Diego Carlos, we'll get to that in Deal or No Deal as well. Better plate than never. Mark Walsh left it late to capture his second Galway plate on Joseph O'Brien's early doors yesterday. And the FAI getting a boost from FIFA alone of about 4.25 million to try and get them through COVID. That's what they've come out with. And smoked Kepa. Smoked Kipper? Is that what they're going for? Is that what it is?
Yes.
It
would have to be.
Keeper resigned to never playing for Chelsea again, looking a bit grim on the sideline there. And he's an early riser, Joseph O'Brien, and the early doors at the Galway plate. Parrott is flying off. Jose Mourinho is ready to throw Ireland wonder kid Troy Parrott to the Lions, except it's Millwall, not the gladiatorial Lions, really. Players can take action. GPA urges members to report training breaches, the back page of the Herald. And that obviously is the same story on the back of the Irish Independent. Players urged to report counties. GPA platform will allow inter-county stars to inform on breaches of training ban. Kelly set to quit if Tokyo is axed. This is a story from Bernard O'Neill saying Kelly Harrington would be happy to walk away from boxing if next year's Tokyo Olympics are cancelled. Roy McIlroy says he may not return for the Irish Open. Obviously the quarantine issues around that, so you wouldn't be terribly surprised if some players who were playing in America didn't make it back for the Irish Open, but obviously you would really hope they do. Conway energised by impact of Larkham and Rowntree, so a long extended period for Stephen Larkham to get his ideas across to the Munster backs and for Graham Rowntree to get them through to the forwards. And Hickey, unfair to focus on players in club versus county. Obviously, Seamus Hickey, the GPA chairman, was part of that call yesterday alongside Tom Parsons and Paul Flynn as the GPA's annual report was released. And I just want to draw some attention to this because it's fairly remarkable. Tommy Lyons bids to add to yesterday's haul of 5 Galway winners. So that's Tommy Lyons, the Irish Examiner's tipster, not the former Dublin football manager, who yesterday had 5 winners in Galway, which is fairly remarkable. We'll see how well John Duggan did versus that when he comes into us in a little while. And IRFU has no plans to ban scrums is the headline in the Irish Times this morning. And window for release of players set to be extended as well. So Dave Hannigan's column is just saying that the GAA needs to be very careful if coaches are going to start charging the way Dean Rock is going to charge, because in baseball it's had a catastrophic impact on the amount of African Americans playing the sport at an elite level. And finally for me for now, it's just wonderful. It is the Racing Post. Burns out to hit the bookies again with Wonderleish in the Galway Hurdle, plus Donica's Classic Queen Fancy Blue bids for more Group 1 glory in the Nassau Stakes at Glorious Goodwood. What do you got for us, Owen?
We start with the GPA.
Yeah.
Donal O'Neill last night, like always a good person to listen to when these stories come up, whenever there's an annual report, really, just to kind of get the history of the GPA, but also his general take on what's going on at the moment. And he basically feels that the GAA are now compromised in their situation, that they are negotiating a new deal with the GAA. They have been negotiating deals with the GAA for the last little while. It's different to the GPA that Donal O'Neill would have been part of when it was founded, where they were very much outside the tent. Compare them to a civil service at the moment. One gem of a line in here, which I hadn't heard before, he says, I remember back in the day, Desi Farrell took counsel from Gerry Adams at one point. And the advice was, if you're going to go in and take the dollar, then make sure you get what you go in for. Go in hard and strike that deal once, because you will only do it once. I'd never heard the Gerry Adams anecdote before, to be honest.
Essentially, Gerry Adams said, go heavy or go home. Is that what I'm hearing there? Right.
Like, bring your best negotiating tactics to the table, is what Gerry Adams said. I'd be keen to hear that anecdote in full and what exactly happened, and if he's had his finger in the GPA pie in terms of influence in other areas before, but that's for another day. In the current GPA situation then, Paul Flynn obviously did a lot of media yesterday, was with us this morning. Like, will we talk about what he said at the end there, Ger? The idea of the competitive balance and what might what that might mean for the future of the GPA, because I think we've spoken a lot about the annual report and put a few questions to Paul Flynn on that. But it is interesting that is going to be one of the next things that they tackle, is the lack of competitive balance in the GAA. And it's very interesting as well that the man who will spearhead that is a former Dublin footballer. And I know we will joke about the fact that we're trying to split Dublin in two, maybe not fully joking about that, but it is mostly said in jest. But I mean, that will all have to be left to one side when Paul Flynn has to address the competitive imbalance, which Dublin are the poster boy of. I think it's fair to say, of competitive imbalance in the GAA. It is the most worrying development in GAA over the last little while. As great as it has been for Dublin and for the game as a whole, if you're getting stuck into whether or not this is good for a competition in the Football Championship, it clearly hasn't been. And it's interesting to see how the GPA will tackle that.
Yeah, it is. There's loads of different ways to do it, and it's a massive conversation that really needs everybody's involvement, because you need the weaker counties' voices to be heard. And sometimes with this stuff, it's almost like the players themselves are always going to want to strive to be involved in the big competition for the one-off thing, and somebody from outside might need to come in and say, well, actually, that's never going to happen, so we're not going to give you the opportunity. We're not going to give the Leitrim footballers the opportunity to win the All-Ireland until actually they've proven that they're ready to compete for it. And we know over the course of history, and right now at the moment, that they're not. Not just picking on Leitrim, any of the Division 4 teams you would say the same about. Most of the Division 3 teams you would say the same about. But if those Division 3 teams get their houses in order, there should be a pathway for them to be able to compete for what's up at the very top tier. It's interesting when they were talking about, so I think that the competitive balance and the fixtures issues are essentially, at the moment anyway, very interlocked, because until you actually have a fair set of fixtures and you know when those games are going to be, you can't advise teams on, you can't prescribe teams a set number of contact hours or a set number of training sessions or a set funding, a cap on the spending for that. Let's assume that you were able to police all that, right? Because I think that's a whole separate conversation. But let's assume you were able to police all that. Would it actually automatically fix things without having the structures of the competitions fixed? I don't think so. And that's why I'm a little bit concerned by the 4/8s being the next phase of competition that might come out of the fixtures. I actually think the correct answer is one of the options, and that's flipping the two seasons, having your provincial competitions be early in the year and then having the summer be a league with the divisions, and then at the end of that you actually have a championship based on league positions. That would be an amazing, absolutely amazing outcome if that was what happens, and that would be fair, because the teams in Division 4 would have a competition that they can win in summertime that offers them a reward of going into Division 3, and likewise, actually, if you win that the way that the fixtures have been designed, you can actually get into the main championship if you go on an amazing run. So, it kind of solves all of the problems, and the funding issue, I think, is actually something that needs to be addressed slightly separately, but is all part of that big conversation. Again, the one thing I would say is that the GPA have become a lightning rod as the organisation who apparently hold within their gift the opportunity to fix all of this, and I don't buy that. I don't buy that the players could go on strike to fix this, because they don't have an agreed template themselves. They don't have the answer. They don't have if there was one single thing that you said the GPA could do and that they're not doing to fix everything, and they didn't do that and they didn't go on strike, I'd say fair enough. But the thing is, their 2,300 members don't all have a single unified idea that is not currently being done. They don't all agree on what the right outcome here is. Some players in Division 4 don't want a second-tier competition. Some do. Some players in Division 1 don't care about what happens to the players in Divisions 3 and Divisions 4. So to say that they should be like, we need to fix this because we've got the solution right here, and everybody goes, well, what is the solution? Like, well, we're not sure. Maybe it's a committee. Like, I have. If you think about the history of the GAA, the change never came quickly. It came after years and years and years and years and years of conversation. And there's the soft power and there's the hard power. And which of these two is actually likely to get ideas through more quickly in history in the GAA? Which has actually traditionally been the one that has worked best? I would argue it's the soft power.
The Cork strikes were pretty effective, Ger.
Well, how did the Cork strikes work out for the players?
Okay, fair enough. Look, but okay, the first strike.
The Cork footballers were building their own gym 18 months ago. We heard. Remember that story?
Yeah.
The Cork strikes did not work.
I think that's open for debate. I think certainly. So there's two strikes. The first strike certainly seemed to have the impact. We don't want to get stuck into.
Yeah, so let's not.
A strike situation. My point is that I think that there is a possibility for a strike to work. I'm with you on the point though that for a strike to work, you need a cause and a singular cause, and you need a certain thing you need a hill to die on. What is the hill that the GPA will die on right now? There isn't one because they're in a mountain range. But that is the situation that the GA find themselves in. There are a multitude of different problems. It could be the fixtures, it could be the competitive imbalance, it could be the club player getting screwed over year after year, who also fall under the GPA's remit. Let's not forget, it's like while they promote elitism, they are still club players. I'd also question as well the fixtures task force, which, as you say, have picked the provinces being divvied up into 4 provinces of 8. And that's the one they want to run with now. Fair enough. But I wonder if we need to pause it again and actually look at what's happening right now and think to ourselves, is this part of the solution? Is part of the solution actually getting the club player and sorting out the situation there first before the GPA can actually act and figure out what fixture reform they want to bring to intercounty football and hurling? That actually what we have right now, this kick-starting the season club style, the GPA probably need to weigh up that first, because Paul Flynn was saying there that he's not sure if that's the best way to go, that perhaps the club season should come afterwards. I wonder if what's happening now is actually something that should impact those fixtures conversations as well. And like on the point of the GPA being a lightning rod, I definitely think it is difficult for one organisation to represent everybody who has so many different interests at the moment. I think the GPA is definitely best served to serve the likes of Dublin and Mayo, as I said yesterday, and your Corks and Kilkennys and the elite counties. I'm not sure if they're capable of serving.
I don't buy that at all. I think that, to be honest, so what you're suggesting is that there'd be another organisation that somehow represents players who are less elite, but also elite to the point where they're playing intercounty. Like, that's just another layer of bureaucracy in the middle of all this. And I actually think that, to be fair to them, the figure that they highlighted of something like 1,500 individuals of their 2,300 members had access to their services, like, that's their role. That's their main function, is to help the lives of players who play intercounty football. This other aspect of them, where they're supposed to be a lobby group, is a completely different aspect of the business that they're involved in, and it's the one that we all talk about more often than we talk about what probably takes up, I would say, 95% of their time, which is representing players and players' interests and sorting out grants and sorting out they didn't get their boots allowance, and there was 20 odd instances of them intervening in disputes. Much better to have that as a single organisation, I would argue, because then that organisation has the power and the clout to be able to say, well, actually, but if there's a separate organisation for the Dublins, like, do you somehow get promoted from one organisation to the other?
Yeah, but look, my point here is on that exact thing, on the lobbying, on the GPA's input into the fixtures task force. And like, yeah, I did mention off air yesterday that is there a possibility that there should be a middle tier. There's a reason I didn't mention it on air is because I'm not sure. I was only floating that idea yesterday. It was just an idea. Like, of course, it doesn't make any sense to actually bring in another layer of bureaucracy. It was just one idea. So I don't know. Like, I just think that when they're actually having these conversations in the fixtures task force, it's very, very hard. And I'm just talking about this specific issue now. I'm not talking about the GPA as a whole, because obviously the services that they offer are fantastic, and we don't actually know the full service to your Division 3 and 4 counties when it comes to if they ever have a mental health issue, if they need treatment on an injury and there needs to be finance for it. I'm sure they're all fantastic. I'm talking about a very specific issue here, which is the fixtures. I would just find it very hard to lobby on behalf of everybody who are in very different situations, because the fixtures as they stand right now suit Dublin perfectly. So they got their extra games in the Super 8s, and this is not about Dublin. Like, they suit the big counties perfectly. I just find in the specific fixtures conversation, it is very hard to represent everybody.
And so what their strategy seems to be is that they're going to wield soft power from within, and they're going to be part of the fixtures review committee, and they're going to lobby their members and go on a roadshow and say these are the 3 options, and then it's the slow, methodical way that democracy works. and it's not very interesting, and it's not very sexy, and it's not we're going to go on strike unless we get this, because being in a perpetual strike means that you can't actually be trusted as an organisation. Like, what are you going to strike on next? Like, a series of referendums on something doesn't tend to produce the best form of stability as we have seen from history.
Can I just ask you one question there? You're right in what you're saying, but who's actually suggesting a strike at the moment? When has that been suggested in recent times?
I think a lot of the criticism is like they're not militant enough, and that they haven't had enough. They haven't threatened to wield their power that much. And it was interesting to hear Paul Flynn say that our relationship with Croke Park is constantly under review, but equally, like, they can't tell us when they're having a row with Croke Park all the time, because if they were to leak that to the media, then all of a sudden, when you're actually going in for negotiations, who trusts who? Like, Donald O'Neill was really interesting about of course you become compromised when you take the money, but the whole point of setting up the organisation was to get the money. And we all seem to think that compromise is a bad word, when actually that's how progress happens, where people give a little bit on one side, people give a little bit on the other, you meet in the middle, everybody's unhappy about the stuff they've given up. But fundamentally, there's a stability in the relationship that allows everybody to progress and go forward.
Especially the situation that the GPA find themselves in now, or that they've created over the last little while, where they decided that getting extra funding from the GEA and being partners with them was the way to go. You're not really going to achieve anything by being at loggerheads from that standpoint, but compromise can be achieved easier from that point of view as well. I tend to agree with you. I still think that if there is to be a moment in the future where there is a particular sticking point, that is when we might see a more militant GPA. Like, if you go militant on one thing, you suddenly realise, we've earned that, but now we've not got the opportunity to solve the myriad other problems that the organisation also has.
Say, for example, we got to a scenario where the Fixtures Task Force, the roadshow happens, and the players want one aspect of it to happen, and then everybody agrees that should happen, and then it gets to Congress and it fails, right? At that point, you would say, we as a group now have this mandate to go on strike, or this mandate to push things through. I don't feel like they have a mandate to go on strike and threaten, okay, well, unless we get this fixed right now, without there being a clear vision and a shared vision that isn't going to annoy all of the grassroots. If they were to say this competitive balance issue needs to be sorted by taking all the funding away from the top tier counties, or whatever it is, like, we don't know what the idea is. I don't think you can rally the posse unless you have a very clear idea and a mandate for what it is that the outcome is supposed to be. So, look, I think they're stuck between a rock and a hard place in many aspects, and I don't see that changing anytime soon, because fundamentally people seem to have issue with the amount of money that the leaders in the GPA get paid. It comes up again and again in the papers when you read it. It comes up again and again from the columnists who are the former inter-county players who are like, well, I could do that job.
Like, I mean, there's no argument to be had here about whether or not the GPA get criticism. Like, they get abuse left, right, and centre. Certainly in the media, anyway. I would actually like to. I'd like to know what the average inter-county player, every inter-county player, thinks of the GPA. It'll never be a poll that'll ever happen. But what do you think of GPA? Give them a rating out of 5. Very interested to hear that, because there is a lot of sniping when it comes to the GPA, and maybe some of that is right quite often, but there's no question that they're probably the most maligned organisation in Gaelic games if you read the papers and if you listen to us quite often. It's hard sometimes to actually know what is the view, because a lot of what they do is behind the scenes, and what we've mentioned with workshops with players and all that sort of thing. Like, it is a welfare organisation, and maybe it deserves a bit more credit on that front.
9 minutes past 8 this morning here on OTB AM. We're talking to you about what's in the sports pages, and I should tell you and remind you, of course, that OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. The back page of the Sun is this other story about Troy Parrott, which is hugely important from an Ireland perspective. If Troy Parrott's going to fulfil his potential, he needs to play football. It's clear Jose Mourinho does not trust him to play enough, to play him in significant minutes at the moment. So he needs to get out and get some game time.
Yeah, for sure. So he's going to go off to Millwall on loan for the season. It looks like it's going to happen. Millwall finished 8th in the Championship last season, managed by Gary Rowett, who is surely at some point going to take a team to the Premier League at this point, has had a few near misses in recent times. Obviously became a little bit of a team with Irish interest last season. You had Jason Malumbi starring for them in midfield. He's not going to be with them next season. He's gone back and finished his loan. So I guess if you've got your Irish colours pinned to the mast at Millwall, you can keep them there because Troy Parrott is going there. Just looking quickly at their statistics from the last season, no one in the top 16 in the Championship scored less goals than Millwall last season. So there's a responsibility immediately on Troy Parrott's shoulders to bang in a few goals.
Yeah, Darragh O'Shea was on the show the other night and he was saying, I think that if you're a young player, you need to get out and get on loan as fast as you can, because the difference between playing competitive football against men who are doing it for their livelihoods versus playing under 23s who are either just playing out the string of a contract that they got that they probably shouldn't have, big difference. So hopefully Troy Parrott succeeds and arrives at Millwall in the form of his life. 10 minutes past 9 here this morning on OTB AM. A quick look at the OTB Sports app for you this morning. You can download this for nothing in the App Store. You just search OTB Sports. The home feed is all of the stories that our newsroom and the teams reporting on the stories that we're creating on the shows. And then you've got the live radio station, all our best video, and our full podcast network is available for you there as well. We've got Deal or No Deal with Phil Egan to come, our NBA Bubble Wrap as it returns tonight, and Racing with John Duggan. So a busy 50 minutes still to come here before 10 o'clock. We're going to be back with John after the break, but later today, the second episode of Andy Lee Meets is released. Keep an eye out for a taster of what's to come in the ad break.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio. OTB Gold. The very best of Off the Ball.
Are you crazy?
This is OTB Sports Radio.
This week on OTB Gold.
The art of beating people is obviously you've got to have the trick, we know that, and it's got to work.
Absolutely brilliant manoeuvre by Mansell, fantastically brilliant.
But I never even wanted to see those people, you know. I went into isolation for many years.
Schmidt was there the last time. They could learn to calm it down a little bit, and everyone else could as well.
Jack McCaffrey, you're very welcome. You just warned me, no boring questions.
Yeah, it's been a long day.
OTB Gold. The very best of Off the Ball. Weekdays from 1 p.m. and 6 p.m.
This is OTB Sports Radio. Live 24/7 on the OTB Sports app.
I've become more philosophical over the years, I think.
Yeah, it's hard to sum up those decisions, like with the parallels of boxing and music, and like you said, signing with this, whether it be a manager, or in your case, a label, or a promoter in my case, how those things might have played out or worked out, or...
Yeah, and whether you'd have taken this gig or taken that or whatever. I mean, we had a thing with Warner Brothers, like we signed with Warner Brothers at one point, and that was a big decision for us that we didn't take lightly. But we also we had a pretty strong hand at the time, and we put some pretty major restrictions on what Warner's could do. We thought that was the right thing to do at the time, and in hindsight, I'm like, I mean, if we hadn't have done that, like, you know, the time, the way that things were at the time, like as far as the musical climate, like, you know, we were potentially sitting on a single that the US label thought could be a big hit, and then we kind of tied their hands a little bit by not letting them work the record over in the UK, where we were actually having big success at the time. So, you know, the two things might have crossed over, but otherwise, who knows? I mean, it's the kind of thing where it could have actually worked to our, it could have actually been a negative thing too.
Yeah, well, like you've always stayed true to your values. I feel like that's one of the biggest things I respect about you and your brothers, is that I'm sure there was a huge temptation by record labels or pressure by record labels for you guys to not to sell out, but to produce commercially accessible music.
Yeah, for definite, and especially in that era. And it's funny because, like, in lockdown, I've been listening to a few podcasts of like bands from that era talking about their experiences, and it's funny. It makes me realise like that we felt like we were being radical at the time, and that we were being very not difficult, but we really held people at arm's length. And it's funny because when I listen to these podcasts, I'm like, all these bands that I thought were probably having a great time were actually having a pretty miserable time. And I think it's because they were maybe having that identity crisis, because things were all bets were off in those days. Things was like you could be a band and get signed overnight, essentially, or like very quickly, and then you straight into like Radio 1 and like and all that stuff because that's what people wanted at that time. And I think it was a lot of hard.
I'm always interested in how that happened. Like, you started the band, would have been what, 2002? But you were playing together since, would you say, your whole life?
Yeah.
And then
just like
you started the band officially, and then like how that, from starting a band to getting signed. I'm always interested in how that happens, because you see these acts and they don't really go into it too much.
Yeah, no, and when I was a kid and I would read autobiographies or band biographies, that was always the chapter that was most interesting to me. Like when you go from being, these wide-eyed and innocent kids to like to actually having that breakthrough, and it is the most fascinating element. 2002, the start of 2002, and that when we made our first demo, record labels were so desperate to find like a British version of what was going on in New York or Detroit at the time, and
like the Strokes or
the Strokes had happened, which I think had taken everyone by surprise because they come out of nowhere, and it really was like causing a huge buzz. And then the White Stripes being an example from Detroit, who were they'd been around on Sympathy for the Record Industry, which was a small label, and but again, like the industry couldn't see, like they didn't see it coming, and so all of a sudden you had like big labels who were like really, really trying to make sure that they cast a wide net and didn't miss anything. And like, we had a pretty good story. We were 3 brothers from a small town, and we were kind of.
Was there ever the temptation for the band's name to be the Germans?
Oh man, there wasn't. But it should have been. It always should have been, and it's still I still think about it.
Missing this?
Salah takes the shot. Oh, Mo Salah with one of the goals of the season! Unbelievable.
Then get this: the all-new OTB Sports app. Off the Ball, Ireland's premier sports channel, now has a new home, featuring the biggest names in Irish and world sports. Podcasts, interviews, news, commentary, analysis. Plus, almost 20 years of sporting archives. All free and ready when you are, at home or on the go. The new OTB Sports app. Download it now from the App Store and Google Play.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
Yeah, a little teaser clip in the ad break there from episode 2 of Andy Lee Meets, as he speaks with Gary Jarman, lead singer and bassist from the band The Cribs. It's all with thanks to Sayat, and it's going live on OTB Sports tonight at 8 o'clock. At 17 minutes past 9 though, time for us to have a look at day 4 of the Galway Races with John Duggan. Good morning, John. How are you?
Yeah, good, Ger and Eoin. Yourselves?
How did you get on yesterday?
I had a 2nd and 2/3, but it was a disappointing day. But I'm just tipping around. Had a thorough look at the card last night and enjoyed the racing on TV. I feel refreshed after a few months not looking at it, and I'm actually eager to get into it.
What was the weather like? I didn't actually see any of the races.
It was murky and rainy, and it wasn't pleasant now.
An Irish summer, I believe.
Yeah, one of those things. Yeah. And with climate change, you just don't know. Like today could be 30 degrees, and then tomorrow could be snowing. So we just don't know what's going to happen with the weather here. And I was looking at Lorcan Wire's update from the course this morning at Galway, and it's soft all over now. It's been raining all night, but it's meant to be dry for the rest of the day. So you need soft ground form in when you're weighing up things. But yeah, it didn't look pleasant. Mark Walsh, when you're young, you pick the jockey, you pick Willie Carson, Pat Edery, you pick like AP McCoy back in the day, or John Frankham, or Charlie Swan. Mark Walsh rode an absolutely brilliant race on early doors to win the Galway Plate for Joseph O'Brien. The big one yesterday, the colours of JB McManus, overhauled Royal Rendezvous up the straight and gave him a peach of a ride, and he should be very proud, Mark Walsh. And that can be the difference sometimes in these big races. And another huge field going to post with the hurdle today, 6:45, 8 races on the card, 4:45 start. Let's get it on.
Tell us a little bit about early doors, will you?
Yeah, the horse has won at Cheltenham. And John Joe Neal's son rode him to win at Cheltenham. So he's a lot of class in the book, but he's a hold-up horse, so he needed a bit of luck and running, and Mark needed to be patient on the horse. And he was. They were hurtling down the hill. Like the place is a tough race because twisting and turning, and you got 2 fences then in succession. And the hill at Galway is steep, just like the Cheltenham Hill. You got a long way to go in that run in. And Mark produced early doors to really deliver. The West Awake ran very well for Edward O'Grady, Cabaret Queen as well for Willie Mullins. So Willie had an easy winner of the bumper as well, but. We'd also had a Gordon Elias, Jamie Codd winner at 12-1 in the last race. So it's funny sometimes you can forget these combinations because there might be another hot pot in the race. But don't forget the good combinations.
That's the problem. There's too many good combinations at this stage.
That's magic combinations.
When you've got world-class racing. So I'm right in saying early doors is a Joseph O'Brien JP horse?
Yes, that's right. 7-1.
So riding in JP's colours. We've spoken with Joseph down through the years over the last couple of years on Friday night racing, and it's clear that his focus is really trending towards the flat. But I guess when JP says, I've got this horse, I'd like you to have it, and it's a jumps horse, you're like, OK, no problems.
Well, Aidan started his career as a jump trainer, Life of a Lord and Lister Brack, 3 champion hurdles before he went into the flat. And his man, the Dunica, has now got a horse that's a favourite today for the Nassau Stakes, the Fillies race at Goodwood. So it's a real family affair. Joseph's got that operation in Pilltown. With a lot of jumpers and dual purpose. There's nothing wrong with that. And JP is not really an owner who has horses on the flat. So if you have a big player like JP in the market, you want to have his horses. And there's that association with Aidan O'Brien, and obviously JP and John Magnier, there's a big association there. So if it's for flat, it's Magnier, Tabor. If it's for jumps, it's JP. And why wouldn't you turn down this great stock that JP has? And JP's invested really in Joseph in the last few years. And it's amazing at a young age. He's had 3 winners already this week at Galway. And he seemed delighted with himself when he was interviewed yesterday on the box.
No doubt. OK, so what are we looking at today?
Well, the hurdle is a really, really good race. I was looking at it. If last year, Tudor City won it. But last year's race was, I think, inferior to this year's. So you have a Cheltenham winner there, Aramax, in the colours of JP for Gordon Elliott, Mark Walsh. You've got Aramon, Felix Deji, both battled it out in a Grade 1 at Aintree about a year ago. Build Me Up Buttercup for Willie Mullins was about to win the county hurdle at Cheltenham this year, but just didn't get up the hill. Really good horses in there. Petit Mouchoir has been around the block in the champion hurdle. Really top race, I think. I'm going to write up, I'm in the middle of constructing my kind of preview for OTB Sports for the app. This is the app. You're going to check this out later on, folks, so you know what you need to do, because we're going to give a bit more of an explanation for why we're doing what we're doing. But I always believe when you're having a look at a race, it's not always about finding the winner. If you can change your mind and think about profit rather than winning, of course we want to win, but if you actually think about profit, sometimes that can be the better way to be long term. Therefore, I'm actually back 2 horses in this race this morning. The first one is number 7, Build Me Up Buttercup. This horse needs to be produced on the line, high cruising speed, but will it get up the hill? It did win a Galway last year, to be fair to it, but Paul Townend will need to be a head waiter on this one because the horse, don't know how much resolution it has, but can I see 7-8 horses finishing in front of it? I think as an each way bet at about 8-1, probably an each way bet to nothing, might not win. But I think the horse at a 6-year-old is improving, and the way he ran that county hurdle, which is probably a better race than this, would suggest that he should be on the premises. Build Me Up Buttercup. The other one I like, and it's been back this morning in the JP colours, and that's always a good sign. Charlie Parks, number 5. Charlie Parks, you can still get it about 20-1 though. Was a really good juvenile hurdler for Nicky Henderson. Lost its way, then went over to Aidan Anthony Howard's yard on the Curragh, Aidan Anthony Howard, and has only had 1 run and bolted up at Leopardstown. I was there that day gathering interviews for Cheltenham. Absolutely sluiced in over 2 miles, 2 furlongs on soft ground, which is right up the street of what the conditions are today at Galway. If Charlie Parks can reproduce that form, I think it's 20-1 to finish in the first 5 or 6 is a good each way bet. So Charlie Parks and Build Me Up Buttercup in the feature.
All right, John, they are 2 for profit. Do you have a winner for us today?
I think Dr. Duffy will win the second race. Dr. Duffy for Charles Burns, just under 2-1, probably about 2-1 by the time of the off. Won 3 hurdle races. Is in a chase now. I think the rest I thought when I was thinking this is muck when I was looking at it last night. I wasn't looking at it now in the Heisenberg hat. that's only coming on for this morning for Breaking Bad.
I was thinking more Al Capone.
Yeah, there's lots of suggestions. Or the guy who's in the Sandeman Port ad all those years ago. I never drank it though. But yeah, Dr. Duffy.
Not too late.
Well, it's not. Yeah, it's actually. Well, if Charlie Parks wins, I'm telling you,
blue cheese.
They'll be buying bottles here for everybody in the audience. Actually, just on this, well, I don't know if you're going to go to the other races, but yeah, Dr. Duffy, I think, will probably win the second race. But when you're going thoroughly through these things, when you're like getting out the fountain pen and you feel like you're in the 17th century, searching for these things, the moments of inspiration, eureka moments. There's a couple of horses that I did pick out in handicap hurdles. In the 6:15, I picked out a horse called Stylish Moment, who's won a couple of chases. And I think if he returns to form at 14-1, Stylish Moment could be an each-way bet. That is in the 6:15. And the other one I picked out in the 7:45, another handicap hurdle, is My Ode Gold at another price of 14-1. My Ode Gold with Gavin Bruder with a very light weight. But it's interesting, even in that race, there's a horse at the very bottom, Bailey Thunder, has been backed. Bailey Thunder, Mouse Mars, has been backed in this morning. But My Ode Gold and the other one was Stylish Moment. I'll be putting them in that blog I'm going to be doing on the OTB Sports app.
All right, good stuff. John Duggan with us this morning, keeping an eye on Thursday's undertakings at the Galway Races, and all those details are going to be available on the OTB Sports app. Get it now in the Play Store or in the App Store, free, gratis, and for nothing. John, thanks very much for that. Deal or No Deal is coming up a little bit later on this hour. Right now on OTB AM, we're going to turn to the NBA. A reminder, of course, that OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. Owen sat down with Ryan Farmer-Jones for our NBA Bull Wrap. Have a look.
Okay, tonight it is the long-awaited return of the NBA. Delighted to say that Ryan Jones is back on the show. How are you getting on, Ryan?
Not too bad. How are you?
Very well, thanks. I guess one way of looking at this from the NBA's perspective is that at least we're not the NFL and at least we're not the MLB. Things haven't gone that badly in terms of getting our game up and running.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. We just had the women's soccer league here. Was really the first sport without obviously quite as much attention to really kick off. And they had a sort of in-season tournament that went really well. The quality of play was pretty good, all things considering the layoff, and the tournament was well played, and they kept everybody healthy. So they sort of set that bar, and the NBA now are trying to sort of follow suit where Major League Baseball has gotten off to a really rough start, obviously, and the NFL. We'll see if that's even manageable. The NBA bubble seems to be working fairly well so far. They seem to be, with a couple of minor exceptions, keeping the guys there and intact and following the rules for the most part. So it seems like it's manageable. It's a league where I think most of the guys seem to get it. And obviously there's a focus right now with a lot of the NBA players that's bigger than basketball with some of the cultural issues here going on right now. So yeah, I think there's optimism that they can pull it off and that if they start out with people staying healthy, that they can maintain that.
Not every player is available as a result of the creation of this bubble. When it comes to the teams that have made it this far into the NBA season, the 8 teams that have got ditched at this point, of the teams that are remaining, which team has been most affected by those that aren't going to be available?
It doesn't look like any of the real serious contenders are. I mean, the Lakers, and their depth, there's been the question about that team since they brought LeBron and Anthony Davis in together, but they look like they'll be okay. The Clippers, the same with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. The Bucks, sort of the Eastern favorites right now. Obviously, we're sort of dominating the league ahead of time. And then you've got that second tier with the Sixers and probably the Rockets. And so I think of the elite teams, there aren't really any missing players where you say, okay, this team missing this guy is going to keep them from having the shot they should have. So I think for the sake of making this stretch run here, this sort of shortened regular season, and heading into this playoff that they sort of made up on the fly, I think the contenders are all going to be, it looks like at least so far, going to be okay as far as the guys they've got and the star players really being available, both for the fan perspective and to give these contenders a real shot.
Yeah, well, let's get stuck into some of those contenders, because tonight we get things underway with an unbelievable game, really. The Clippers against Lakers. It's exactly the sort of game we wanted to whet the appetite immediately. Let's start with the Clippers. Things were coming together to them nicely before the break. I saw an incredible statistic earlier on that Kawhi, Patrick Beverley and Paul George have missed a combined 51 games this season. Right. things are going to come together nicely for them at this point. The bubble has been a positive for the Clippers.
I think so, and that was always the question with those guys. You know, Kawhi has had stretches in his career, a number of stretches where he's had a hard time staying healthy, and obviously that run up to, you know, with his time ending in San Antonio and then in Toronto, where it was a question of you know, him almost saving himself for the playoffs and taking chunks of the season off, and whether he needed to or he was just sort of doing that because he could. But if those three guys are healthy and they've got a pretty good bench unit as well, the Clippers are a very scary team, and we haven't really seen them at full strength. With George and Beverly, like you said, for an extended amount of time right now. So I have a hard time looking at them based on what Kawhi Leonard has done, knowing that, you know, how hungry Paul George is to kind of put himself up on that elite top tier. I think the motivation for him, especially as a Southern California guy, you know, playing nearly at home, there's just a lot of motivation for that team. And they also know that breaking out of the shadow of the Lakers, which the Clippers have never been able to do, to be able to do it in a year where the Lakers are also very good and have LeBron, would be a really remarkable thing for them. So I think the motivation's there. They seem to have the health. And if they can keep, you know, certainly Kawhi and Paul George healthy, I think they've got a great shot right now.
Is there a shot that it changes the scene in Los Angeles whatsoever when it comes to basketball? Because you could say that there would be bragging rights on offer tonight if Clippers had any fans.
Short term, yeah. The Lakers are, you know, I grew up in Southern California in the 1980s, so I grew up on those Showtime teams, and I grew up knowing the history of the teams that had come before. And obviously then you had the Shaq and Kobe years, and then just the Kobe years after that. So the Lakers have had, you know, half a century or so to really establish themselves. So they're so ingrained with the city and the city's fan support. The Clippers they'd enjoy the bragging rights for as long as they're very good right now. But as far as how that city, sort of the heartbeat of the city basketball-wise, the Lakers, they'd have to win a lot more for much longer to be able to kind of compete with the Lakers on that level.
For sure. And the Lakers would have to be pretty terrible for a long, long time and probably have to behave in a terrible way and like sicken their entire fan base by doing something. Just on George and Kawhi, like, where is the ceiling for these guys? Like, as you say, we've barely seen them play together in the Clippers uniform so far. But just from what you've seen individually throughout their careers, if they build up a little bit of cohesion for the remainder of this season into next season, is there a chance that we're seeing a modern great duo here?
I think so. I mean, you know, neither of those guys is in their, you know, mid-20s or whatever. So, I mean, they both got a few years on them. And again, both have had some injury issues. You know, the knock on George has been that he's one of the better all-around players in the league, a great defender. And when he's playing well offensively, he's on the level of almost anyone. But the knock on him has been that he's not a guy who has stepped up in the playoff opportunities he's had, has not been a guy who's hit big shots. There's been that knock on him. It's a little unfair. But he hasn't yet shown it on the level, certainly that Kawhi has, or LeBron, or some folks like that. So whereas Kawhi, obviously, you know, particularly last year and in the previous Spurs title run, he's shown that he's a guy for those big elite moments in a way that very few other players in the league are right now. So I think for the two of them together, you know, does Kawhi sort of by default become the guy down the stretch if they need a big shot or a big stop, or is George going to have opportunities to step up and will he take those opportunities? And that's really what remains to be seen for me with that team. If George can perform in big moments and maybe, you know, with a bit less pressure, knowing he's got Kawhi Leonard there, that he doesn't have to do it all or even most of the job, you know, you would think that might ease some pressure on him and allow him in those sort of big moments to play a little more relaxed, and that could make the difference for him. So I think if they win this year, and again, health permitting, because that's been a challenge for both those guys, but health permitting, if they win this year, you could see at least a couple more years where they're going to be really, really tough to beat.
For sure. Let's talk about Lakers. Has the bubble been a good thing or a bad thing for LeBron and the Lakers?
You know, I think it's been really good. The knock would be, or I guess the question would be, you know, LeBron and AD really just hitting their stride playing together. And LeBron, a guy who is so, you know, really unequaled right now, probably in the league at making his teammates better. And so the more time he has with guys, the more they know his tendencies, the more he knows their tendencies, and the better he can sort of put them in positions. I think he and AD figured that out pretty quickly, and it helps when one's LeBron and one's AD, right? They're both so good. And AD, you know, you throw anything up within about 15 feet of the rim, you know, he's probably going to dunk it. So that eases things up a bit too. I think, like I said, the knock would be that they were maybe building some real momentum before the bubble, and that, you know, okay, do you lose that? Does that cost you something? But with LeBron, I go back to, you know, before last season, you know, when they flamed out, before this season, when the Lakers didn't make the playoffs, he had a summer off for the first time basically since his second season in the league. And if you looked at how many games he'd played in that stretch and how long his seasons had gone for so long, my thought with him was that given the time off and the motivation of not making the playoffs for the first time in so long, that he was really going to come back refreshed and motivated. And I think we saw that. So I think, to me, whatever they may have lost in motivation, whatever they might have lost in momentum, I think the motivation and even additional rest for LeBron now could be invaluable for him because, again, he's got a ton of mileage on his legs. He's got the mileage, considering all the playoff games, of a guy who's, 37, 38. So I think a rested and certainly motivated LeBron, and if AD is able to stay healthy, again, the lack of depth around them is still a little bit of a question. Is Kuzma going to be able to step up and play well? The rest of that supporting casting, and they brought in J.R. Smith now, so you've got a guy with at least that championship experience and experience alongside LeBron. So I think that, I think the Lakers are well positioned after this break and being in the bubble as well. Again, if LeBron stays healthy, you have to give them a shot against anybody, right? If AD is healthy as well, that duo is still going to be awfully difficult for anyone else to deal with.
Without question. I think before the break, the momentum behind LeBron as a potential MVP candidate had started to heat up a little bit. I'm sure most people, if you polled them today, would still say Giannis is unquestionably the MVP decision. But this is the reason why I presume most neutrals want to see LeBron go up against Giannis in the NBA Finals this year.
Yeah, I mean, the head-to-head matchup, of AD and Giannis, these two sort of freakishly long, athletic, versatile players. But as far as two MVP caliber guys, LeBron and Giannis, and LeBron with all he's already accomplished, and Giannis with the MVP, probably another one now, and getting to the verge of that truly elite level, but not having yet really proven it in the playoffs. Last year there was a sense that the Bucks system and his shortcomings were exposed a little bit in the playoffs there, where it was like, well, hey, if you can just force this guy to have to dribble every time, and you can contest that and double him in the lane and force the rest of those guys to make plays around him, you can beat him, and that worked out. He's clearly better. I think the Bucks are clearly a better team. There's no doubt. I think that Giannis learned from that, and that they learned from that as a team. So I think, they still need to be the favorite given how well they were playing. To me, they're also a little bit of the wild card based on how much the bubble and the break going into the bubble has impacted them. I think it's a little less clear of a benefit, maybe, in my opinion, than it is to the Lakers and Clippers. But to have that matchup in the finals would be incredible. Yeah, as far as star power and the established veteran guy against the young up and coming new star, and again throw AD in there, who's again one of the best all around players in the game, would be an incredible matchup.
So what has Giannis done this season to learn from what happened last year?
It's not. I don't think he's completely changed his game, because why would he, right? His game is already pretty terrifying. But I think he's understood a bit more that he can't just rely on that sort of, galloping, striding thing he's done so successfully, especially when they get in transition, where he just sort of blows by everyone and teams just aren't big and fast enough to stop him going to the hoop. He's got to have a little bit more consistency in his jump shot. I think we're seeing that. He's got to work a little bit more on developing, some moves, some post moves. Again, this isn't, the NBA of 20, 30 years ago, where you really want him posting up in the true sense. But I think he's added some pieces there. I think he's also learning some patience. And that's maybe it as much as anything, sort of understanding, hey, here's what teams are going to do to defend you. And that really, the nature of the NBA has always been, you may be able to be much better than a team in one head-to-head matchup. But when matchups can be a focus over a 6 or 7 game series, you might be able to do 2 or 3 things that really hit at the weaknesses of a superior team. And I think that's what we saw last year. And I don't think the Bucks are nearly as susceptible to that this year. I think Giannis is going to be more patient. I think he's less likely to get frustrated by the kind of, I don't want to say junk defenses, but the sort of defensive approaches that teams have had to kind of adapt specifically for him. So I think becoming a better passer, a more trusting teammate, not that he wasn't those things, but I think there was room to improve on those. And I think we started to see that with him. And I think that's why they're going to be very tough to stop.
Yeah. So just for clarity, you think they're going to win the NBA championship, the Bucks?
Yeah, I'm going really back and forth on those 3, and that's a cop out, I know. I think that it's really, yeah. If I had to pick right now, it sounds like you're telling me I do, right? I think I would pick the Bucks. They were just so dominant to start. They did, the last Laker head-to-head meeting, I guess, was right around Christmas. You could see they were just a better team, and it took the Lakers and LeBron really sort of playing, going all out and clearly motivated and energized by the matchup, but the Bucks were just a better team. And so, yeah, I think if I had to right now, I'd pick Milwaukee. I think they're just playing it again. Giannis primarily is playing at a level, and they've got the right pieces around him. I think they're well coached, and they've got a good system for what he does well and what they've got around him. So I'd probably pick the Bucks over the Lakers right now, but I think all three of those teams have a great shot.
Is there, I guess this is what is the way of framing this question? If there was one team in the East who could potentially upset things, who is it going to be? Because you look through the teams, and certainly it seems to me the team with the most on the line in the rest of the East outside of Milwaukee is Philadelphia. This kind of feels existential. This team has been built on the premise that you should be qualifying for the finals with this level of talent available to you, especially with LeBron gone from the East. But it's still not going to happen, is it?
I think it could. There again, Embiid and Simmons are two really, I don't want to say unique, but pretty rare talents, and to put the two of them together, and they've had that system going now for a few years, so I think they have the potential, but they've also been trying to figure that team out, and it's still been an ongoing process, right, to figure out how well those two fit with each other, and do they clog the lane, do they get in each other's ways, how do they best complement each other? Ben Simmons has finally made a three-pointer, so there's been some growth there. But I still think, again, look how close Philly was last year against Toronto, right? It just takes that bounce. If that bounce goes different, then maybe we're talking about Philly as a defending champs, or at least the defending Eastern Conference champs. So I don't think they're far off. Embiid is a monster, and if he's healthy, I think the bubble and the break going into the bubble certainly could be great for him, because he's had this sort of wear and tear issues already at this point in his career. So I think that could be a real plus for Philly. Again, I think it's going to be a tough climb for them against Milwaukee, but I think they've got a shot, and I think they're the one team. Boston, when they've played well, they've looked really, really tough, and Tatum is kind of emerging into that maybe top tier guy, but I don't think they're quite there with this team, and I'm not entirely sure I trust the sort of chemistry with that team all the way through. Which again is maybe a little bit of an issue with Philly as well. So I think both those teams could, if they get hot. Again, this short run into the playoffs is what's going to be interesting, because you're not going to have that sort of the way teams usually pace themselves. Teams that know they're going to be in the contention are sort of able to pace themselves over the last few weeks of the season and rest certain guys and maybe try out different lineups to figure out where you're going to get your depth and things like that. This is a very different time. They basically have this couple of weeks, and then they're hitting the playoffs on the fly. So I think that could, that might impact things. But I think Philly, maybe Boston have a shot of upsetting Milwaukee. But again, it's going to take them, either of those teams, playing really perfect basketball.
It's going to be really interesting as well if you get one of these play-in series, which people have been talking about. And one of the potential matchups, and it's back to the West here, that people have been talking about is Memphis against New Orleans, and the potential to see Ja Morant go up against Zion Williamson. Of course, it's a dream scenario that it's a play-in series. So I'll just put that one to you. Who's your rookie of the year, and which of those individuals is most likely to make the playoffs?
It's, the Zion Williamson thing is funny, because it does remind me a bit of LeBron coming out of high school and the hype with him coming into the league. And in a way, Zion has even been better as a rookie. I mean, there was that obviously that delayed start where they were very probably cautious to a fault, but I think it was clearly the right thing to do, because you saw the level he was playing at. I mean, he's a phenomenal talent, and it's not just the athletic ability. He's already showing that he knows how to play defense, and he can pass, and he can shoot, and he should get better in all those areas. So if he can stay healthy, I still worry about a kid that heavy jumping that high all the time, because you got to land on those knees, right? But he's just remarkable, and so they've got some pieces around him there. They've got some shooters. They got Drew Holiday. They got a floor general. They've got some guys who could theoretically put together a little bit of a run. Memphis, again, a pretty young team, an exciting team. I think Ja Morant, based on body of work, has got to be that guy for Rookie of the Year to me. But that would be a really, really fun matchup to see in any context. I mean, those guys, those are two of the future of the league guys that you're talking about over the next, hopefully, 10, 15 years. And that would be a blast.
For sure. One last question then. What's your take been on the messages that are going to appear on the jerseys over the next little while, and some of the decisions that people have taken? I see Gordon Hayward has gone for education first, or he's gone for I want to say the softest anti-racist message possible. Is that fair to say?
I think that's probably kind to say. I don't know Gordon. I don't want to impugn his character at all. But yeah, that was, you know, I've never been in the NBA, but as a white person who's worked in around the NBA a lot in media and has known a lot of NBA players, and you know, it seems like the least you could do at that point was just go ahead and go with equality or something. You know, at a bare minimum, to pick education reform, which can kind of mean a lot of different things, not all of them necessarily beneficial, you know, to black people generally. I'm not sure what the decision was there. You know, the thing I had said early on more broadly about the league taking this was when they gave guys a limited list of what the options were. That right away told me that, well, some guys are not going to feel comfortable with this if it can't be pretty personal. You know, if you can't put the name of one of these police brutality victims on your jersey, or, you know, a message that was a little bit more personal to you, the fact that they were dictated options, that right away made me wonder. And what I then wondered was, you know, are there going to be players who say, you know what, this isn't how I want to express myself? And of course, LeBron was one of the first. You know, he's been so present with that on a number of levels. For him to decide, now I'm just going to keep my name on my jersey, I'm doing other tangible things, and other players have kind of followed suit there. You know, I think we'll get used to it pretty quickly, right? We'll get used to seeing these things on there. You know, the NBA is far from perfect. It's still a giant, you know, corporate entity essentially, and so you know, it's got its motivations. But I think it was a good gesture, certainly, at least to allow the players to do something along these lines. The fact that they're not going to force these guys to stand for national anthems, I think, is a no-brainer. I'm glad that's happening, and so, you know, hopefully the chance, they've been great about it so far in the bubble. So many players in their interviews have put the focus on Breonna Taylor and that shooting in Kentucky that no police have still been arrested for, which is awful. So I think, yeah, as long as that allows the focus continue to be on these issues in a positive, constructive way, I think it's great.
For sure, and it's always been a league that's been at the forefront of these sort of things, so it's great to see it continue on that vein over the last little while. Listen, Ryan, you're going to be back with us on Saturday on the Saturday panel. Much more chat on that front as well. A very special US Sports Saturday panel coming your way on Off the Ball this weekend. I'm sure we're going to chat to you on this show very soon as well, because there's plenty of basketball over the next little while. Ryan Jones, appreciate you taking the time out of your holiday to take the call this morning.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Always fun. Thank you.
I signed for them after the Euros, and after my first day's training, I was driving home. I was actually thinking, regretting it. What have I done? Like I walked into a circus. It's amazing, isn't it?
I always forget to turn my headphones down at that last bit as the scream comes in and bursts my eardrums. Phil is here. Phil, good morning to you.
Good morning, yeah. The circus is back in town.
Time for another deal or no deal. We're going to get straight into it. Rising Irish star Troy Parrott, aged just 18, is set to go on a season-long loan to Millwall, according to multiple reports overnight. Millwall finished 8th in the Championship under Gary Rowett. Parrott has 3 years left on his Spurs deal. Is this a smart move? Is it the right level? What do you expect from Troy Parrott next season?
Yeah, I think it is a good move. The Championship, I think if anyone watched the Brentford and Swansea game last night, you just see how high the standard is. Brentford were brilliant, and you know, they could be in the Premier League next season. In terms of Millwall, just missed out in the playoffs. Obviously, Jason Malumbi was one of their star performers in midfield, and I think this would actually be a good move. Obviously, he stays in London. The Championship, people say, you know, think maybe it's a step down, but he's only 18. We have to be patient with Troy Parrott, and if he can get into the team, sometimes Millwall, the formation can vary, where it has been 4-4-2. Sometimes he goes 4-4-1-1. He's he's played 3 at the back as well, a 3-4-3. But if he can get into that team, then obviously we're going to see exactly what Troy Parrott is made of. Because does anyone want to see him just brought on for 5 minutes by Jose Mourinho when, let's be honest, things are not going well? He decides, right, let's bring on Troy Parrott, or else things are going so well that Mourinho takes off his first choice players and said, there you go, Troy, we're 5-0 up, you can have a run out for 10 minutes. Now, we need to see Troy Parrott play competitive games where, you know, he's going to be up against tough tackling defenders in the Championship. I think this would be a good move, and if he can get into the team, then, you know, it'll be interesting to see what kind of tally of goals he could get. You look at Ollie Watkins scored last night for Brentford. That was his 26th goal. Mitrovic scored 26. They're the two out in front. And then say even look at Patrick Bamford, Leeds crown champions. He got 16 goals, and you know, he's constantly criticised for not scoring enough goals in a team that creates so many chances.
Emiliano Martinez has been on loan 7 different times before he actually ends up being first choice for whatever period of time he's first choice here at Arsenal. So loan deals and becoming a Premier League player, not exactly the worst thing that's ever going to happen to somebody, particularly when they're 18. Is there any chance that he could get a loan move to a Premier League team?
Possibly, but I said the Championship, it might be seen as a step down, but as I said, the quality is still excellent. We're going to see when Stephen Kenny gets his team going, like there's going to be Championship players in that team, and as I said, it's a really high standard. And what we need is Troy Parrott playing regular football, because you would have heard Darragh O'Shea off the ball over the weekend or during the week talking about how when he went down to lower leagues, played with Hereford and Exeter, he found out what 3 points is all about.
Yeah.
Not playing under 23s football where
doesn't matter.
Yeah, I've even heard Stephen Hunt talking about this, going to games, looking at players playing under 23s. It's not competitive. You want to be playing a competitive. As I said, you understand what it's all about to win games, and the pressure that comes with it, because there will be pressure on Millwall. The fact that they just missed out in the playoffs, but there'll be a lot of hope that they can get into the playoffs next season. And if Troy Parrott is part of that, I think that would be a good environment for him. We'll see exactly what he's made of.
Let's talk centre-backs, okay? So the London Times reports that Napoli's Koulibaly, Inter Milan's Skriniar, Vertonghen of Spurs and Torres of Villarreal are on Manchester United's 4-man shortlist of centre-back targets. Do any of these names jump out at you?
Torres is an interesting one, obviously 23, but left-footed. Obviously Vertonghen's left-footed as well, but Harry Maguire is playing on the left side of the back four. And I know obviously sometimes it's gone to a back three in certain games for Solskjaer, but if you look at the way they set up, it's usually Lindelof on the right-hand side of the back four of the two centre defenders. So if you did get in a left-footed player like Pau Torres, then obviously you could switch Maguire over. And I think Maguire would probably be a lot more comfortable because, obviously being right-footed, you want to be playing on that side of the central defence. Torres is only 23, but he's a good ball player. He's he's got a cap for Spain. He's definitely an up and coming talent. And you think that if you go for someone like Vertonghen's not he was at Spurs for 8 years. His best days are behind him. Koulibaly is, out of all those players you mentioned, Koulibaly is the best of the defenders. Now he's 29. I don't know what all the players that seem to be linked with United at the moment tend to be quite young. You look at their attack at the moment; it's so young. Like obviously Mason Greenwood, Rashford, Martial. These are all young players. If Jadon Sancho comes in like we expect him to do, again, the age profile. It's if you're building for the future and you're building to try and close the gap on the top two, you want those young players. But maybe Koulibaly is just one of those players that you bring him in and automatically he just makes you better because... And
you get 3 or 4 years out of him and it doesn't matter.
Why do we think that the Koulibaly thing hasn't happened in recent years? If a Premier League club wants somebody, they tend to make it happen. And Koulibaly's been linked with a multitude of Premier League clubs for every single summer now. I wonder if we're past that point of Koulibaly being able to make a real difference, or if the Premier League clubs know something that we don't. He hasn't had an unbelievable season. He's looked good in the Champions League, where we've seen the most of him, but Napoli haven't been good in Serie A whatsoever. I think Skriniar is probably the best shout for somebody from that list, although he's been playing in a back three for a lot of the season. And Barcelona look like they're going to be in for Torres. A 50 million release clause, though. So I'd say if United get their hands on him, it'll be one of those transfers where you look, that was a nice piece of business. But if Barca are in for a Spanish defender, it's going to be very, very hard for them to say no.
And I suppose the worry is, as I said, he's an up and coming talent, and he's a lovely footballer. He's only 23. You throw him into the Premier League straight away. Will he be able to hit the ground running? And then
bring Chris Smalling back. Let him have a year sitting on the bench, getting games, play him in the League Cup, play him in the FA Cup, play him in those games we expect to win. Give him 25 games this season, and then next year you have somebody who is acclimatised and ready to become world class over the next couple of years. If Solskjaer is going to be there for the long term, these are the types of signings that you can make. If he's not, he's got to put all his chips in, get Koulibaly, and try and build to the point where they're going to trust him long term.
Yeah, I'd agree in terms of Skriniar how good he is, but he hasn't suited Conte's system. You know, obviously we saw when Conte was at Chelsea that Azpilicueta was part of a three, which as a fullback, it's great to have somebody in there that doesn't mind getting dragged into wide positions, because, you know, if you're playing on the right-hand side of a three, you're going to have to cover that space in behind the wing-back, who obviously is told to go forward, and that hasn't suited Skriniar. But if you bring him in and maybe you get him into the two-man central defence, maybe that will suit him more. And, you know, he's 25, and I think Inter are quite happy to let him go, to cash in on him, because, as I said, he wasn't as good as he has been this season. As I said, I think a lot of it is down to playing in that three-man defence. Give us
a score out of 10 for Harry Maguire for his first season at Old Trafford.
I'd say 7. I think, you know, he's obviously taken the captain's armband, so now they see him as a leader in that dressing room, and, you know, he's an England international. But at times, his positional sense isn't great. He's not the quickest. So if United want to push on and dominate games and they want to squeeze teams, and because they were so effective in the big games playing on the counter-attack, so Harry Maguire can sit in and teams can throw crosses into the box, Maguire's going to clear them all day. But if you're trying to play a bit further forward and you've got a high line, that's where you would worry a little bit about Maguire. But yeah, like the price tag is always going to be there, but I think he certainly added a bit of solidity to and he was an upgrade obviously on the likes of Phil Jones or Chris Smalling. So that's why I'd say give him a 7. And, you know, even though he was playing with Leicester and he's an England international, there's still a pressure there that, you know, so maybe we'll see
a better performance next season.
A better performance from Harry Maguire next season. And, you know, by the looks of it, he's going to have better players around him as well.
All right. According to The Sun, Kepa believes he's played his last game for Chelsea. He's been made the scapegoat for Lampard's side's limitations in defence. Is Kepa a bad goalkeeper, or is he just the fall guy? Is there a road back for the £71.6 million sterling 25-year-old?
I think he's a bad goalkeeper, folks, isn't he? Have you seen the statistics around Kepa that have essentially gone viral over the last couple of days? Extraordinarily bad stat line. So these are a few of them. During his 33 Premier League games this season, he's let in 47 goals, and a save percentage of 55.4% leaves him 127th out of 132 goalkeepers in Europe's top 7 leagues. Using data from FBref.com, Kepa's save percentage has been compared to 729 goalkeepers who have played 10 or more matches in England's top flight. Kepa finished last. That is 730th out of 730 goalkeepers with statistics attached to them. He's got the worst save percentage in Premier League history to play 10 or more games, with 54.5%. He has conceded 8% of Chelsea's Premier League goals ever. And for 14 of his 47 goals conceded this season, this is a remarkable stat, he didn't move. So for 30% of the goals he conceded this year, he didn't budge in goals. So they're fairly striking, to say the very least. But it does strike me, especially the last statistic there, that this is a mental issue with Kepa. Like, he had a pretty good season last year, kept 14 clean sheets in the Premier League out of 36 appearances. So he's just nosedived this year completely. He's been a terrible goalkeeper this season. Is he a terrible goalkeeper overall? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I'd agree. I don't think he's a terrible goalkeeper. I don't think whatever about the amount of money they paid for him, and obviously being the world's most expensive goalkeeper, there's a pressure with that. But what's the difference with this season and last season? I think the system has changed, and obviously Chelsea had a lot more possession playing under Sarri, so maybe he didn't have as much to do. But there's a frailty there for Chelsea from set pieces, and that can come down to the way they mark or they don't mark, but also the goalkeeper. There was a fairly clear incident the night that they lost to Liverpool 5-3, where you have the two most expensive goalkeepers in the world letting in 8 goals between them. But there was a ball that was put into the box, and you could actually hear the Chelsea defenders shout at Kepa basically to claim it, and he let the ball go across the box. And what that does, if you're a defender, it just means that every ball that goes into the box, it just causes panic, because you know the guy behind you isn't confident. And I think he has played his last game. I think that Frank Lampard's obviously made the decision last week or on Sunday to play Willy Caballero. He had brought him in for the Cup semi-final against United. He's obviously going to start Caballero, I'd say, against Arsenal. And yeah, I think just try and get as much as they can from him. And he goes back to Spain. Who they bring in? There's a lot of talk of Dean Henderson at the moment, because obviously Dean Henderson's had a great season with Sheffield United. He wants to get into the England team. Jordan Pickford's not exactly in great form at the moment. Maybe you're looking at Nick Pope and Dean Henderson trying to challenge him there. And if Dean Henderson wants regular football, it seems that Solskjaer's going to stick with De Gea. So Dean Henderson might say to United, right, I'm out of here. And Chelsea bring him in. And I suppose that'd be one way of seeing if Dean Henderson really is as good as a lot of people are making out that he is.
If I was Kepa, I would Winston Bogart the whole rest of my Chelsea career and sit on that bench and be happy picking up my millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of pounds for doing nothing. Nothing. I mean, sounds like the best job in world football. Yesterday we told you about Manchester City's interest in Ferran Torres. The Guardian report that's a done deal. And the 20-year-old will join Pep's side for €27 million plus add-ons, which seems like a pretty good deal. Sid Lowe described him as the outstanding young Spanish player of his generation coming through. He did note, though, that he will demand some patience as he develops. Man City also being linked with Bayern Munich's Austrian left-back, as are PSG. The 28-year-old is expected to cost €20 million should Pep bring him to England.
This is Alaba, is it? I presume that's who you're referring to.
Yeah.
The only Austrian left back on Bayern Munich's books, anyway. I'm not sure. I think this is does versatility make him a good signing for Manchester City? Like the person we've been speaking about in this regard is Declan Rice quite a bit. I know he hasn't been linked with City, but the fact that he can play in midfield as well as at centre back is making him an attractive prospect.
Didn't
Chelsea.
Pep famously pick him in central midfield?
This is a dream for Pep if he brought Alaba in. Obviously, play left back, play centre half, play midfield.
All at the same time sometimes.
Absolutely.
Pick a team with 8 players in it.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if he left Bayern, though. I think he's a quality player. Obviously,
he's not going to get the cash filled by all accounts. Yeah. The contract negotiations aren't going well.
Yeah, but these things have a way of working themselves out when it comes to crunch time. And
I do love an old crunch time transfer negotiation contract.
Once you're given the deadline, it's like anything. It's like, when you were doing homework in school, like you didn't do it till right at the last minute. Like,
now.
You
Speak for yourself, Phil.
You need the thrill of it, after you hear the Glen Rowe music. But yeah, it would be a great signing for Manchester City. I said he covers all those different positions.
One doesn't know what Glen Rowe is, Phil.
He should go on the tour you can go down to Glen Rowe in Wicklow if you're not familiar on it. It'd be a good day out for you. But in terms of Alaba, the only thing is Laporte obviously is left-footed as well. So does he want to have 2 left-sided centre halves?
Oh, Pep does, absolutely. He'd be like, look at me bucking the trend. I've got 2 left-sided centre halves. I'm so cool. Look at me. Ryan Manning, 24, that's young, is being linked with a move to West Ham from Queen's Park Rangers by the Telegraph today. Give me a legitimacy rating on this.
I'll give you an 8, Phil. If I'm not sure what you're going for, I think this would be an excellent signing for everybody involved. Manning's had a brilliant season, really, kind of developing as a left back. West Ham could probably do it a left back, so they're looking at the next best option from the Championship. So he's chipped in with a couple of assists, a couple of goals this season as well. He's getting forward well. Like he's obviously seen him as an attacker in a previous life, but he's 24. You say he's young, but really this is his first season and that I've seen where he's actually exploded and has been consistent and has got consistent game time, because Steve McLaren didn't really fancy him, it seemed. So I think he's ready to make the step up. I think West Ham could do it at left back.
Yeah, big time. Obviously Aaron Cresswell's not getting any younger. Masuaku is a player that he goes into that bracket of great going forward, not going the other way though. And Ryan Manning, it's such an interesting story. A midfielder, starts playing as a left wing back, but obviously QPR in the last few games of the season were playing a back 4, and Manning was part of that as a left back. So one thing, obviously being a midfielder, he's comfortable on the ball, means when he gets into the final third as well, he has the end product, and he strikes a mean penalty if Mark Noble isn't on the pitch as well, although Mikel Antonio has taken a few penalties towards the end of last season as well. But it would be a great move for him, and
legitimacy.
He's a player that I think we're going to see plenty of in the Irish jersey with Stephen Kenny in charge. Even though Enda Stevens is there, Manning is certainly someone we're going to see in the squads. I'll match Owen's 8 on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
AS in Spain report that Atletico Madrid have shot down an offer of 25 million and Matteo Guendouzi for the Ghana defensive midfielder Thomas Partey, which is denying us obviously the ain't no Partey like a Partey headline. Is Guendouzi done as a gunner? What's your legitimacy rating here, Owen?
on him being done at 9. There were basically, it's like you've got a little bit too much money in your pocket and you've got so many sweets in front of you to sweet shop and you're just trying to spend it all at this point. That is what Arsenal are trying to do with Guendouzi at this point, just trying to get rid of him. They need to get rid of him, and they've been offering him to like Barcelona for Philippe Coutinho as well, which would kind of be funny, but it would obviously be for a loan deal. So instead of paying the 20 million loan quid, 20 million quid loan deal, you get Guendouzi off your books and you get Coutinho for a year, which actually wouldn't be a bad deal, I think, if they managed to reduce the wages that they had to pay a little bit. But for Partey, there is no surprise here that Atletico Madrid have shot this down. It will be a fantastic move for Arsenal if they manage to make that happen. Like the thing, I would actually be more confident of the Coutinho thing happening because of the fact that Drabchian and Raul Sanllehi seem to have a very good relationship, and he's obviously running the show at Arsenal at the moment.
These are the backroom politics that make all these things happen. My sense is that for Atletico to shoot down that rumour, it took them so long to load the bazooka because they were laughing their heads off, Phil.
Yeah, Guendouzi is a player that Arsenal want to get rid of. Obviously, Arteta had a falling out with him. We got a little insight into what Guendouzi's like on the pitch in terms of what he says in that Brighton game. And Neil Maupay revealed that it wasn't so nice what he was saying. And it's all well and good if Arsenal were where they once were, where they were winning big major titles. But there's Guendouzi giving a bit of stick to one of the Brighton players, and you're kind of looking at him going, your team is not all that at the moment. But you know, this was a player that when he broke into the Arsenal team, there was high hopes for, because you know, he's tenacious, and this is what Arsenal needed in midfield. But with that,
surely they should just loan him to another Premier League team and see what happens, see if he can calm down or get some sense. No, that's the right thing to do. Get him out of the club for a year, let him come back, you know, tail between his legs, but having played 30 games in the Premier League and establish himself as somebody who can play at this level.
Yeah, he might just want out.
Maybe.
Guendouzi might just decide, you know what, if you don't appreciate me, I'm going home, or else I'm going somewhere else, but I'm getting out of England, getting out of the Premier League, and you can shove it, Mikel Arteta.
10 out of 10 that Guendouzi's gone?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Whether it's permanent or it's a loan, but I'd be very surprised if we saw him at the start of next season.
Okay, we'll do an Arsenal deep dive on what they need to improve to become a Champions League side again. We don't have time now, but
need a lot of time.
Barcelona legend Rivaldo has backed Philippe Coutinho to rediscover his best form, but has warned that it won't happen at Camp Nou. He says, "Go to England," says Rivaldo, who never obviously played in England. At Arsenal, Spurs or Leicester, Coutinho could be a regular starter next season. Where's Coutinho going to go, Phil? Give me a club, one club.
I think of all the clubs you mentioned there, the best fit for him would be Arsenal. As in, that would be his best chance to get playing in a position that he wants to. Like, but
there's no more room on the physio table, Phil.
No, he'd be okay. He'd be all right. Sometimes with some of these players, when they're out of form, the injuries creep up a lot more. But when you actually get a nice flow of football, then the injuries go away and the confidence comes back. But yeah, it hasn't been good since he left. He obviously, like...
Speaking of confidence, I got to move on, sorry, because Joe Hart.
Oh, yeah.
Celtic and Joe Hart. Give me a legitimacy rating here, Phil.
No, it's not happening. Celtic are going for 10 in a row. This is a massive season for Celtic. It starts on Sunday. They can't take a risk on Joe Hart.
What are they thinking? This is tomfoolery.
Yeah, I can't see it happening.
They're expected to sign Vasilis Barkas, the Greek goalkeeper.
Who even, by the way, in Scottish football, Vasilis Barkas sounds better in a Scottish accent than Joe Hart. There's so many players that deserve to play in Scottish football because of their name. I thought that last week, or a couple of weeks ago, when Thomas Souček signed his deal with West Ham, I thought, there's a guy that could play in Scotland with that name.
Finally, for now, Luis Suarez has been linked with a deal for David Beckham's Inter Miami. He's 33. Is this his level? Has his decline been an understated factor in Barcelona's struggles? Or, if you're Leeds United and you're thinking of signing an over-the-hill striker, why not go for this guy?
Are we sure he's fully over the hill? Like, this would be a sensational signing for any MLS club, I would have thought.
Yeah, I think I'd say he'd get a nice deal over there as well. And I would be surprised if he'd want to come back to the Premier League. You know, nothing even, just if Suarez thinks back on his time at the Premier League, you know, he banged in goals. Obviously, they came up short in 2014. They didn't win the league. But you know, all the different problems he had off the field as well. He might just think, no, I'll steer clear of that one.
Fair enough, fair enough.
Got a little reminder of it he did when he went back to
Inter
Anfield.
Miami, 7 out of 10, 4 out of 10, 9 out of 10?
4 out of 10.
I'll go with a 6. We need to get boards that we can hold up.
I think he's on the way. We do need to get boards. That's a good idea. That is the end of Deal or No Deal today.
I signed for them after the Euros, and after my first day's training, I was driving home. I was actually thinking, regretting it. What have I done? Like I walked into a circus. It's amazing, isn't it?
That is also it from OTB AM this morning. If you haven't got the OTB Sports app, go and get it. It's the best place to listen to us or to watch us or to hurl your abuse generally in our direction. 12 o'clock today, Golf Weekly. Peter Lorre and Fionn Davenport join Nathan and Joe to talk about John Ram, the unstoppable juggernaut that is the world number 1 in golf at the moment. OTB Gold today is Cora Staunton at 1 o'clock, and then Catherine Switzer talking about the 1967 Boston Marathon, where she was prevented from finishing the race, and a photograph of her being stopped because she was the first woman ever to do it goes globally. State of the Union with Keith Wood and Aina Falvey from 3 o'clock, and then tonight John Giles, the news round, the football show, and St Pat's manager Stephen O'Donnell ahead of the return of the League of Ireland. OTB AM live every morning from 7:30, wherever you get your good stuff, and make sure you get us on the OTB Sports app. We'll see you tomorrow. Best of luck.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.